Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to the debates with the candidates for the Thunder Bay Rainy River riding. I'd like to thank the Chronicle Journal for putting it all together and inviting the candidates, getting the panel together, and inviting you folks to come out and listen to what the candidates have to say. The format for this evening will be I will ask each of the candidates to make an opening statement. They'll have a minute and a half to do that. At a minute and 15 seconds, our bell ringer, Luann here, will ring the bell, and then they'll have 15 seconds, the bell will ring again. I will thank the speaker and move on to the next speaker. For the opening comments, we've selected the order by lot. Not necessarily by how the candidates are settled here, as they are settled in alphabetical order. After the opening comments by each of the candidates, we'll then turn it to the four media people to ask a question each. Each candidate will have a minute to respond. Again, 45 seconds, the bell will ring. At 1 minute, the second bell will ring, and I will thank the speaker. So they will ask the question to all the candidates or any one or more. Each of the candidates, however, will have the right to respond, and if there's any further issues that they want to reply to, they can do so. After the media has asked their questions, I'll turn the floor over to the mics. There's one here, one over there. I'll invite you to come to the mic and ask your question. Please ask your question. Don't make a summary or an opening statement. That's for the candidates. And we'll just alternate between the two mics. And then partway through, I will go back to the media and ask them for any more questions that they might have. At the end, each of the candidates will then make a summary. They'll have a minute to do so. Again, 45 minutes. The bell will ring, and in a minute, the bell will ring again, and I will thank the speaker. So that's the format for this evening. I hope you do enjoy it. Feel free to get your questions ready, and as I say, come to the mic. So now I'll introduce the candidates. On my immediate left is Mo Kamuzi. Next to Mo is Christy Radburn. Then there's John Rafferty and Don Russack. The media panel consists of Ian Pattison from the Chronicle Journal, Lisa Lacko, CBC Radio, Leith Dunnick of Dougal Media, and Vic Krasowski of Country 105. So with that, I'm going to call on our first speaker, John Rafferty. Mr. Rafferty?
Thank you very much, Keith, and hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. So we can speak about things of substance tonight. I'd like to clear up a couple of things that you might be thinking about. The first is the long gun registry. You probably got a pamphlet in your mail saying the NDP wants to bring it back. I'm just looking here at the October edition of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, of which I'm a member. Let me just quote here. The NDP has been clear. We have absolutely no plan to bring back the failed Liberal long gun registry. We all know this was an initiative that divided Canadians, and we will not be turning back the clock. So hopefully we don't have to talk about that tonight. The second is the child allowance. I wasn't going to talk about this, but I received it in my mailbox today that the NDP, I think it said in the Liberals too, are going to be getting rid of the child allowance. That's not true, at least from the NDP's point of view. I don't know why you get these things in your mailbox, except I can only assume that Mo doesn't have a chance to read them before they go out, because I know she knows that they're not true. Now imagine my surprise reading the Chronicle Journal this morning when I read Patty Haydu's comments. 95% of the time the principals, I guess, aren't involved in political decisions. It didn't say in the paper. I assume there was a discussion about C-51. That's 15 seconds, okay.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Mr. Russack. I hope he answers tonight. Was Ms. Haydu wrong when she said that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Next speaker will be Christy Radburn. Ms. Radburn.
Thank you to the Chronicle Journal and the Community Auditorium for this opportunity. I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting tonight on the traditional territory of the Fort William First Nation, Miigwech. Last year, my staff asked me to provide a quote that we felt represented our beliefs and our values. I chose Margaret Mead's, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." You have seen and heard, and we'll hear more tonight about how a time for change has come, and never more has this been true. Canadians are raising the first generation of children who will not live as long as their parents or do better than them, and they will inherit a brutally threatened planet. But real change, world-altering change, is never the work of large, powerful political parties. Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Tommy Douglas, Rachel Carson, Elijah Harper, all individuals or groups, not large, powerful political parties that change thinking, communities, and countries in the world. They forced reluctant, racist, homophobic, and often violent governments and tyrants to change. This election is about stopping the tyrant, Stephen Harper. There are many theories about how to do this, but the first way to stop a bully is to stand up to him. Neither the Liberals nor the NDP in 7 years have stood up to Harper as effectively as Elizabeth May and Bruce Heyer of the Green Party. This election, you want real change, someone who will stand up to any government and hold a minority's government feet to the fire to make their promises good, someone that will hold a position of influence, a big voice in a small party that will hold the balance of power, someone who will not be a backbencher lost in the caverns of a vast political machine, then you need to vote green.
Thank you, Ms. Redburn. Call on Don Resnick. Mr. Resnick.
Well, thank you to the organizers of tonight's debate and forum here at the Community Auditorium. Me and John talked earlier, and we noticed a lot of empty seats here, and it's disappointing that more people here in Thunder Bay and the region aren't involved in the political process. I'm just hoping more people are viewing it live streaming on the Chronicle Journal website today. In any event, I'll thank you all for coming and all the people who are here tonight. Tonight I want to focus on the economy and the Liberal plan to bring change here to Thunder Bay. Specifically, I want to talk about renewing aging infrastructure in Thunder Bay, and guess what? The Liberal plan to lower your property taxes. The Liberals promised to double the current infrastructure spending to $125 billion. Will do exactly that. There's been a strong pullback in the economy, and the Liberal plan is the only plan that addresses the problems that we have in our region, and specifically here in Thunder Bay. My friend to the right and Ms. Kamuzi's parties will have you believe that running a balanced budget, so to speak, and we all know that the conservative balanced budget is a bogus balanced budget, is the way to manage the economy right now. And we know that that's untrue. The Liberal plan will help with our councils across the region plan their infrastructure spending and help reduce taxes for you here in Thunder Bay and across the region.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. Mo Kamuzi. Ms. Kamuzi.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mo Kamuzi. I'm your Conservative candidate for Thunder Bay Rainy River, and I want to thank you for inviting us out this evening. I want to share with you the reasons I'm running in this federal election and why I want to be your next member of Parliament. I do respect the leadership of the Prime Minister, and he has ensured Canadians are safe in times of uncertainty. He has helped Canadians prosper with lower taxes for our families, seniors, and small businesses. And because of this government's hard work to ensure job creation in spite of tough economic times globally. The Conservative government has a proven record of economic strength under a strong and balanced leadership of the Prime Minister, and we are the envy of the world. When the world is faced with uncertainty from international groups that want to destroy our way of life, Stephen Harper has acted with certainty and decisiveness, battling terrorism and the likes of ISIS, unlike what our opposition party would do. As a business person, I know the value of hard work in Canada, and this is where most jobs are created. The small business tax credit provided by this government has created hundreds of thousands of well-paying jobs in Canada. So thank you very much for having us tonight, and I want to thank you, and I'm Mo Kamuzi. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kamuzi. Okay, we'll turn to the media. I'll call on Vic Krasowski to ask the first question. Vic?
Thank you very much. This question is for Mo Kamuzi. Thunder Bay's Kevin Page is in the city right now promoting his new book on his time as the Parliamentary Budget Officer. He told me in an interview that our system of accountability are broken and need to be fixed. He says this government went to new levels in efforts to hide what is going on behind the scenes with our money. So the question is, if people vote Conservative, are they voting for more secrecy?
Ms. Kamuzi?
Thank you for the question. Most importantly, we need to look at our low tax plan. We've created more jobs than any other country, 1.3 million net new jobs. Not quite so sure about the secrecy part, but I do know that young families are benefiting from the universal child tax credit. There's more money in Canadian families' pockets right now that will go back into our communities. Our government has a proven plan and a balanced budget strategy. I don't know how you can run deficits and call that healthy. I don't know in whose family that is. So under the balanced budget plan of Stephen Harper, keeping our taxes low and creating jobs and keeping Canadians safe, that's not secrecy to me. That's good leadership. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
Under this government, we've seen, specifically under the long-form census reduction, we've seen response rates drop from 95 to 69%, which renders that data totally unreliable according to statisticians. When you have wrong information, chances are it will put you on the wrong path of policy development. What we've lost under the Harper government is the ability of scientists to be able to talk about their findings and question government policy, the ability of Canadians, like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, to access information that was readily available, to access government information and records without a lawsuit. Carleton University information and management consultant explains to us that without access to large parts of our institutional memory, leaders are without the means to make sound and strategic decisions. Canada currently is in the dark ages in scientific data sharing. Additionally, the loss of that census information doesn't allow us to know how many people are employed, where they're employed, or what they're doing.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty?
Thank you very much. 10 years ago, Stephen Harper said, 2005, he said he's running on accountability and transparency. Well, in fact, neither of those things have happened. Democracy in this country in the last decade has taken the biggest hit it has ever taken. And the reason is this. No one knows what's going on. We saw with GPP recently now, virtually we know nothing about what's going on there. There are 4 checks and balances on a prime minister in a majority government. The first are MPs, but we can't do our job if we don't have any information. The Senate is the next one. Well, we know that they're a little dysfunctional at the moment. The media is the third check and balance, but they can only surmise. They don't really know what's going on. And the last is the Supreme Court of Canada. They're the ones who can still do their job, and that's why Stephen Harper hates them so much.
Thank you. Mr. Resnick?
That John mentions the Senate because his party wants to, as a check on the power of the Prime Minister, because his party wants to abolish it. If anyone knows the constitutional wrangling we went through in Charlottetown and Meech Lake, and Ontario and Quebec have already said no. It's impossible without the consensus of the provinces to abolish the Senate. What we need to do is a real plan to reform the Senate, and the Liberals have that plan. And we need to check Stephen Harper's or any Prime Minister's power. What's absolutely scary to me as a lawyer is that Stephen Harper is appointing possibly the next 3 Supreme Court justices. We used to have it done by committee. We had Justice Binney here from the Supreme Court of Canada. He said they used to have a consensus. Now, not so much, and that's scary to me. It'll be a change for a generation if Harper gets back in.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. Any further comment? Okay, Mr. Rafferty?
Yeah, I don't mind saying that the last 7 years as your member of parliament has been very frustrating, particularly for this very reason. When we're in committee, whether it's in Veterans Affairs Committee or Natural Resources, which I also sit on occasion, and other committees, there is no information coming to the opposition, meaning the NDP and the Liberals. It's almost impossible to get any financial information, any real financial information from Stephen Harper. I'll give you a good example. You know, he's talking about 1.2 million net new jobs. Now, I don't know what kind of math he uses for net new jobs, but there are 200,000 fewer jobs in Canada now than there were in 2008.
Speaking of committee, Mr. Rafferty's party was absent at C-51. The Conservative government was going to pass that piece of legislation. The Liberals were there to make amendments to a horrible piece of legislation. It's still a horrible piece of legislation. It needs certain parts of it repealed. and it needs to be changed. The NDP party was like a child in the schoolyard stomping their feet and saying no, no, no. The piece of legislation was going to pass in a majority Conservative government. The Liberals were there to make changes to protect Canadians' rights.
The first party that was there.
Ms. Radburn, the next speaker, Ms. Radburn.
The first party were the Green Party. Everybody else stood behind and waited for us to do something before you stepped in and tried to make amendments or before anybody opposed Bill C-51. It took 3 weeks for Tom Mulcair to decide that that was a bad bill. This government has made a systematic job out of hiding information from citizens, out of reducing good policy information. The idea that we have a job surplus right now, our Canadian statistics don't even tell us who's got a job and what they've got a job doing and how long they've been employed there. It doesn't tell us what their education level is. How can you base any planning on that, much less claim that you have a surplus or that you have job creation when you don't even have reliable data that you're basing those claims on? And the people that have stood up to Harper time and time
Low
again
taxes,
are Elizabeth May.
Just a second,
1.3
Ms. Camuzzi, go ahead, please.
Thank you, sorry. I can't listen to this. 1.3 million net new jobs, low taxes, universal child tax credit, proven programs. These aren't promises. These are proven programs, money that goes into your pockets every day. The only thing we can do is create more job opportunity here in Thunder Bay, Rainy River, and I'm going to be the one that's going to tell you how to do that. None of my counterparts have even mentioned that, how to create a job for our kids, for long-term, good-paying jobs. That's what we need here in Thunder Bay, Rainy River. You can go on to Bill C-51. It protects law-abiding citizens. That's what Bill C-51 does. And it gives the tools to the police and authorities and border control people to do their jobs. That's what it does. Protects law-abiding people. Thank you.
Mr. Rafferty and then Ms. Radburn.
Okay, thank you very much. I like Mr. Rusnak, but in all due respect, he wasn't there for C-51. We looked at the bill very carefully. We did put forward amendments in committee, but they were not accepted, as the Liberal ones were not accepted either. In fact, in 4 years of this majority government, in every committee, not one opposition amendment was accepted by the Conservatives for any bill.
2 terms.
Any bill at all.
Ms.
Ms.
Radburn, just a second, Mo.
Sorry.
Ms. Radburn.
You don't create jobs by corporate tax cuts. That costs us $12 billion annually, and corporate tax cuts lead to $629 billion sitting in dead funds. Dead funds that weren't reinvested in this country, dead funds that didn't result in investments in machinery and equipment. In fact, it reduced the number of investments in machinery and equipment. Dead fund that the corporations of this country are sitting on and taking away from Canadians. That doesn't create jobs. Raising a tax rate 4% on large corporations actually isn't sending them across the way. Trade agreements like TPP sends away jobs to other countries.
Ms. Camuzzi.
2 terms, 7 years. What job has your NDP candidate put in this community? I can tell you, nothing. We need job creation here in Thunder Bay, Rainy River. That's what we need. We don't need to look outside, and small businesses grow into corporations. That is how we run Canada. We are the small business is the engine to this whole country. And everybody else wants to penalize us. Everybody. Corporate businesses provide jobs. Small business people, low taxes, that's what creates jobs in this community. And we now need to figure out how we're going to create more job opportunity so we can keep our kids here and provide them with jobs so we can watch our kids grow.
Okay, last speaker, Ms. Radburn.
The Green Party actually introduced legislation to protect small businesses, to require that every single federal legislation that goes through the Parliament actually looks at its impacts on small businesses. We proposed to reduce the small business tax rate to 9%. We also proposed to incentivize small business infrastructure development as well, and provide incentives for businesses that will invest in green technologies. That is the coming future. That is the boat that we are missing as Canadians right now, and that's the investment in green technology. China and the U.S. are far ahead of us there. That's where good jobs that are going to last into the future will come from.
11% to 9% decrease in the small business tax. That is the engine to this economy and the Canadian economy. And it is the engine that drives this community, Thunder Bay, Rainy River, and now we need to provide more job opportunity. That's what tonight's all about. More job opportunity for our kids and our families so we can watch our grandchildren grow up. That's our obligation here tonight. Provide jobs.
Keith, I'll be
Okay, Mr. Resnick.
I'll just be very quick here. And
Go ahead.
we've done this 5 times, so I think we're all lowering the small business tax rate from 11 to 9%. And we've heard that a bunch of times. I don't think we need to mention it again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Leith, your question, please.
I want to talk about infrastructure. I guess, what is your #1 infrastructure project that you would like to push and advocate for in Ottawa? And I guess, how do we get that money here in Thunder Bay?
Okay, we'll start with, Christy Radburn, please.
So the Greens do have a plan for investing in infrastructure, specifically at the municipal level. One of the first ways in which we do that, Leith, is to raise their share of the gas tax to 5 cents. So right now, you're getting a little less than 1 cent. We also would create an infrastructure fund for aging buildings. Aging buildings actually generate 30% of our carbon output, so we get a win-win with that situation. We also would create, as I said before, government incentives for businesses to invest in R&D and green tech to improve our position globally from 11th among OECD countries. Additionally, we would create legislation that requires, well, we've already talked about that, federal legislation to evaluate the potential impacts on small businesses prior to passage. And this is really critical. We have a $353 billion infrastructure gap in this country. And the only way to close it is to improve the revenue streams to our municipalities. And that goes for increasing it from 8% and restoring it back to what it used to be.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty?
Yeah, thank you very much. And you said one infrastructure project, so I think maybe I'll just quickly talk about the Ring of Fire. Interesting also to note that in Mr. Trudeau's platform, Ring of Fire wasn't mentioned at all. Actually, neither was FedNor. Actually, not one mention of Northern Ontario. So let me choose that one because it is so critical. We have pledged $1 billion over 10 years to the Ring of Fire, and that is mainly for infrastructure for the Ring of Fire, because you need to ensure that quality transportation routes are available, and the provincial government has said they'll put in $1 billion. Now, of course, we know that Ms. Wynne never intended to ever spend that money, so she's going to be surprised when we form the government and actually put $1 billion in, because she's going to have to pony up too, which means we're all going to have to pony up.
Thank you. Mr. Resnick?
I don't think Mr. Rafferty's been following the polls and seeing where his party's going in terms of forming the next government, which it very likely looks like they're not going to form the next government. Ms. Wynne won't be surprised because they've committed $1 billion to invest in the Ring of Fire. In terms of infrastructure projects in the region, the Liberal plan is $125 billion over 10 years, the most significant investment by the federal government ever. It's not up to the federal government to dictate to municipalities on what they spend infrastructure on. But part of that plan is making sure, and I've been to Atikokan, Fort Francis, Rainy River, Emo. I'm from the city of Thunder Bay. I know the problems with the core infrastructure, sewer, water, and the municipalities are raising taxes, your municipal taxes, to unsustainable levels. So those projects need to be funded more fully by the federal government to reduce your taxes.
Thank you.
That's my priority.
Ms. Kmusi?
The Ring of Fire definitely is our next boom. The province must put together their infrastructure plan that then will allow for federal funding. That infrastructure plan is your business plan. That'll open up for roads, education, energy, schooling, all sorts of affordable housing. Once that infrastructure plan is in place, then we're on our way, and it will happen. But the province needs to do their part and get off their hands and get this infrastructure plan completed. That's what's holding up the Ring of Fire right now, for good, long-term paying jobs for our kids and other communities that will branch off with the prosperity from that program. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
Just briefly on the Ring of Fire, I would hope that what's holding it up is a good, sound decision-making process that's going to include consultation, real consultation with First Nations communities in the North, as well as a full environmental assessment. Additionally, it's great to give out numbers that we're going to commit in billions to infrastructure, but we need to really commit to a revenue stream that's going to produce those billions. We have a problem right now. The balance of revenue coming out of the federal government back to municipalities for infrastructure is down to 8%. 40% is running to the province and 52% is running to the federal government. That's an imbalance. It has to be improved, but the only way to improve that is to increase your revenue stream. So I'd like to hear how we're going to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I just want to build on something that Christy was talking about, and that is having large corporations in this country pay their fair share. By putting up the tax rate by 2 percentage points for large corporations in this country, we will help to free up that 600, I've heard different numbers, 620, 650, $680 billion of dead money. By the way, that's not my term, that's Jim Flaherty's term. While he was still the finance minister, he called it dead money. He said, here they get all these tax breaks, they get all this taxpayer money, and then what do? They sit on it. The trickle down doesn't work. They don't invest it in new plants and hiring and building materials. So if you want to get infrastructure built, you've got to ensure that large corporations in particular pay their fair share.
Thank you. Did you want to make any comment?
Sure.
Again on infrastructure?
I do.
Go ahead, just a second.
I'm fine. The liberal plan is clear. With these other three parties, three parties, it just doesn't work. The liberal plan is a real plan that is going to see real results in communities. Mr. Rafferty's party is planning a balanced budget, and so is the Conservative Party. That's just smoke and mirrors. It's not reality. Justin Trudeau's being honest with the Canadian public and saying we're going to run small deficits every year to spend money now when money's cheap. And everyone heard the analogy. When you own a home, it's a good time to invest when money's cheap to borrow and increase the value of your home. That's what we need to do, and that's the best analogy I can say about the liberal infrastructure plan.
Thank you. Ms. Camuzzi?
First of all, deficit spending in any family is toxic. It raises taxes and it kills jobs.
Well, they spent.
I don't understand how your leader, Mr. Trudeau, can stand in front of the Canadian public and say, it's okay, everybody,
except
you go
for an
home and
election
spend
year for the
all your money on
Conservatives.
your credit cards because Justin says it's okay to do that because it's going to look after itself. The Canada Building Plan has $80 billion available for infrastructure and projects such as the Ring of Fire. Let's just get the province moving on this infrastructure plan and let's get our kids to work so we can enjoy good-paying, long-term jobs. Thank you.
Ms. Radburn?
And therein lies one of the problems. There is no federal leadership right now. Let's just leave it up to the provinces and see what they do. That comes to climate change. It comes to infrastructure.
It's called working together, Christy.
They don't work together. They don't work
together. Working together with the municipality, the provinces, and the federal
every
government
single
to
family
ensure
that
we
I know
have
in this
healthy
community,
jobs.
One
every
speaker,
single
please.
family,
One speaker,
every
please.
single
Ms.
family
Radburn.
that I know in this community, the ones that I work with every day, the ones that I teach every day, are running a deficit right now. And they're not running a deficit because they choose to. It's because their wages aren't livable. They can't make ends meet with the food costs, the housing costs, and everything else that goes on. So don't pretend that it is a choice to run a deficit for a family in this community by and large.
That's why we need to create
Mr.
good,
Rafferty,
long-paying
please. Mr. Rafferty?
jobs.
Well, thank you very much, and I have to smile when Ms. Camuzzi talks about, uses the credit card analogy when she's talking about deficit, because what she's not talking about is the debt, the total debt that Mr. Harper has added during his 9 years, and he has added $118 billion to our debt. So, you know, for Mr. Harper to talk about, oh, we balanced the budgets in an election year, and everybody's supposed to be really happy about that. What about the $118 billion he's added to our total credit card?
Mr. Resnick?
Well, I just want to talk about, and again, Ms. Camuzzi saying that they're going to run a balanced budget. I think everyone knows that it's a bogus balanced budget. When you're not spending on veterans, when you're not spending on the Coast Guard, when you're not spending on the environmental protections, the analogy again, going back to a house, you're selling your windows, doors, carpet for what? In an election year yet. They didn't run balanced budgets for the whole time they were in government, for the last 10 years. You can look at, there's many graphs all over the internet. You can see how much they've spent. And by selling GM shares, underspending in programs, they balance a budget this year. in an election year?
Proven
Smoke and mirrors.
leadership, low
Final
tax
comment,
plan.
Ms. Kamuzi?
Proven leadership, low tax plan creates jobs. High taxes kill jobs. They don't create them. And don't listen, these are promises from the NDP. You've got high deficit running from the Liberals. Let me tell you, that increases our taxes and kills jobs. Let's keep our taxes low. The universal child tax credit gets paid directly to our kids into their bank accounts every month. That's not bogus. That's hard cash in their banks every month. I'd like them to speak tonight to see if they'd like that to go away, Mr. Rafferty and Mr. Rusnak.
Okay, we'll keep it going then. Ms. Radburn.
Jobs. Yeah, it's hard to go to a job if you can't afford childcare. Start with. Income taxes. High income taxes on corporations, runoff corporations. The income tax in the United States right now is sitting at 29%. We're sitting at 15%. I don't see a lot of companies from the U.S. flocking here to Canada right now to take up shop. Companies leave, companies send jobs away because they go to countries with cheap labor standards, they go to countries without unionized workforces, they go to countries where environmental standards are lax and they can get away with it, and then they sell our products back to us cheaper than what we could manufacture, all the while exporting jobs off of this country. You can't tell me that just creating any job makes a difference in a community. I know the people that can't get to those jobs and why they can't get there. Poverty is a reality.
Because they don't have any right now that are,
Mr. Resnick?
are good paying
Mr.
jobs.
Resnick, please.
I just have to, I'm absolutely flabbergasted by the Liberal candidate, or sorry, the Conservative candidate out here today.
We'll delete that from the record.
What the Conservative government has done in the last 10 years to this country is absolutely ridiculous. I think everyone here in Thunder Bay knows that Prime Minister Harper has sullied our name internationally, has ruined our economy, and his excuse that in 2008, yeah, sure, we had a financial crisis, but it's been years from that, and he hasn't improved our economy. It's still in trouble, and staying the course isn't the answer. It's again smoke and mirrors, and it's mind-boggling that my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. I'm going to turn to Lisa Lacko for her question. Lisa?
I've heard a lot of people talk about the middle class and families during this campaign. Where I work at CBC in Thunder Bay, we're right down there on Miles Street. We're right next door, I think, to the busiest food bank here in the city. And on Tuesday and Friday mornings, the lineups begin for people lining up looking for food. I've been there a long time. I've seen that lineup grow every week, and I've seen the range of people go there every week, grow and grow and grow. I see young families, I see single people, I see people pushing walkers, I see senior citizens going in there. It's incredible in this country where we're so rich that we have such poverty. I want to know what each of you are going to do to lift up the people who are at the lowest end of our social scale, to put them in some sort of track that life is not so hopeless for them.
Thank you, Lisa. We'll start with Mr. Rafferty. Mr. Rafferty?
All right, thank you very much. These jobs that Mr. Harper talks about, 80% of them are precarious jobs. They are part-time jobs. They are low-paying, often minimum wage jobs. And the people that Ms. Lacko was talking about, many of those are working poor. These are not people who are not working, who may be working 2, 3 part-time jobs to try to make ends meet and to feed their families, but they fall short every pay because they can't do it. And so one of the ways to make sure that working people have an opportunity to improve is by raising the minimum wage. Now, you've all heard our commitment, $15 for about 100,000 federal workers across Canada, $15 an hour. What we are hoping is that working with the provinces will also do that, and some provinces have already indicated they will do that. So that is one way to start to move these precarious jobs into an area where Ms. Lacko doesn't have to see them every pay or every 2 days down at the food bank.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Mr. Rusnick?
I know my Green Party colleague will talk about this, but the guaranteed income supplement, or and I want you to look at, if you have the time, Liberal Policy Resolution 97, and they did a project in Dauphin, Manitoba, between the Manitoba government and the Liberal government to have a guaranteed income for people, to make sure they had money to support their families. An amazing project, and it's Liberal Party policy. I think that no matter what you do, you need to feed your kids, you need to be able to afford education. It's not a handout, as the Conservatives would have you believe. It's a hand up, and it helps our most vulnerable in society, and it gives them respect and decency, and it gives them a home, and they're able to afford to buy food for themselves and just have a life.
Thank you. Mr. Kamuzi?
Low tax plan creating jobs. The Universal Child Tax Credit is paid directly to our kids into their bank account. It helps with families. The income splitting helps with our families. The pension splitting helps with our seniors. We now have come out with an individual widower tax credit that will help with the most vulnerable seniors. Most important thing is that everybody wants to contribute to their families. They want to have a good paying job. They don't want to have to be in that sort of situation. So let's get us back on track. Let's provide some good paying jobs to help these families contribute to their families. That's how we do it. Keeping our taxes low, keeping the programs in place we have, and creating more opportunity for our community.
Thank you, Ms. Kamuzi. Ms. Radburn?
You can't take advantage of opportunity if you're so poor that you have to decide whether you're going to pay the rent, put some clothes on your kids' back, or eat. I see it every single day. Parents make that decision. And the reason they have to make that decision isn't because they don't want to go get a job. It has to do with the fact they can't access the education levels. The poverty in this country is crippling, and it creates mental health issues, it creates addiction issues that we cannot overcome without addressing those first. You cannot suggest that making a job, whether it's at Tim Hortons or down at Starbucks or wherever it might be the solution for these people to pull themselves up out of poverty. Those folks that are buying that food or getting that food at that food bank, and many of those people I know quite well, those people using that food bank are using it because they can't get cheap, healthy food in this community. They live in food deserts where there's not food available. They can't get to food that's available because of the cost of importing food has increased. And with TPP, we just guaranteed that we were going to import more food and make it even more expensive for our families. We need a regional, local food sustainability strategy as well as a guaranteed livable income. And thank you, Mr. Rusnak, for speaking to it.
Mr. Rafferty.
So, Ms. Lego, let's lift these people up. How can we do that? Well, increasing minimum wage, as I mentioned before, a national pharmacare program, because we know that many of those people who use that food bank don't fill their prescriptions, don't take them as they should, and because they can't afford to, their health gets worse, more of a burden on the healthcare system. Let's make sure everybody who has medications can get them and can use them and can afford them. Daycare spaces in our northern platform, and I hope you'll have a look at our northern platform. When Tom Mulcair talks about daycare spaces, a million daycare spaces over 10 years, we're talking about 19,000 of those in Northern Ontario. That will free up more people. If they can find affordable daycare, they can work and they can lift themselves out of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Go to Mr. Rusnak.
Again, smoke and mirrors on behalf of the NDP, $15 an hour minimum wage. That's going to affect far too few people in today's society. It's federally regulated industries, and as you all know, there's not many people in a federally regulated industry who doesn't make $15 an hour.
100,000 people across Canada.
Well,
that's more than a couple of people.
But the smoke and mirrors of the NDP is that they want the people at Tim Hortons and the people at McDonald's to think that they're going to get $15 an hour. And that's just not true, and it's disingenuous on behalf of the NDP. They talk about their $15 a day childcare program, $8 to $9 billion from the provinces. In the first spaces, you won't see to 8 to 9 years. Again, smoke and mirrors. These are their core platform. This is the NDP's core platform, and it's smoke and mirrors. Look at the Liberal plan, and it's a plan that invests money as soon as we get into power and make sure we have jobs for people here in Thunder Bay and Northwestern Ontario.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
I find it a bit disingenuous that we sit here in an election year and talk about poverty and talk about the increasing groups of poverty and who can't access jobs and who can't access food, because we don't talk about it. Our two parties to the left of me didn't talk about it for the last 7 years with Stephen Harper. Nobody said anything. Now we're here to talk about it. So I'll tell you what, as a Green MP, we'll hold the balance of power, and we'll hold whether it's the Liberals or the NDP, we'll hold them to those promises. We'll make sure that the Liberals pull out that policy number and create a guaranteed livable income. We'll make sure that the NDP holds to its promises to help expand the CPP so that seniors' pensions can outlive themselves, so that they have the opportunity to stay in their homes and not live in abject poverty on fixed incomes. We'll make sure that they hold to those promises. That's what I promise you.
Thank you. Ms. Camusi.
Thank you. Universal Child Tax Credit is paid directly to our kids into their bank accounts every month. When I asked a little girl and her husband at the door, what would you do if that income didn't come to your account every month? She goes, Mo, I wouldn't know what I'd do. Right. It's guaranteed money every month that helps our kids. And listen, they're having more children. Isn't that wonderful? We have more children because of the Universal Child Tax Credit. And those tax credits help our families, and good paying jobs help families too. And creating more job opportunity, I'm going to keep saying it until I'm blue in the face tonight. That's what we need here in Thunder Bay, Rainy River. Good paying long-term jobs for our kids, and keep the programs coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
I'd just like to take a moment to correct Christy. Now, of course, she wasn't in Parliament, so she didn't know or didn't realize that as the official opposition, we have a lot of questions in question period. We question the government every day on poverty-related issues, food issues, food security, retirement security for seniors, all of those things. I would hazard a guess, of all the many hundreds, thousands of question periods I've sat through, that poverty was always on that agenda, every single one, every single question period. So I'd just like to correct you on that, Christy.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn.
Universal tax credits and income splitting, unencumbered tax cuts without conditions, they actually end up benefiting just about everybody. That's right, including people who are making well over $200,000 a year. I know people who bring in two very, very nice incomes and also receive a universal tax care child credit every quarter. So the problem with unencumbered tax cuts is that everybody benefits from them unfairly. So the people that are supposed to be getting the lion's share, the people that are supposed to be benefiting from this, that are able to supplement their income, they actually get less and aren't actually the ones that benefit from this. Income splitting, if you've got one parent who can stay home and not work, good luck finding that family in this community right now, then yeah, you can benefit from income splitting.
Okay. Mr. Resnick.
Well, the universal child care benefit under the Conservative Party is not income tested. And I've used this example, and Christy mentioned it briefly, that I have a friend here who's a doctor. His wife is a lawyer, and they make a lot of money, and they're getting a check for their 3 kids. That's the type of tax credit the Conservatives are handing out. And I think a lot of people know here, and we'll call BS when we see BS, is that it was to buy votes right before the election. They're handing out checks. What a lot of people don't know, though, is my friend right here and the NDP party is continuing on with the universal child care benefit. The Liberal plan is not to do that. It's to have an income-tested benefit that'll benefit the families that need it, not the families that don't.
Ms. Camusi, and then Mr. Rafferty. Ms. Camusi.
I would really like to ask a young person in this room tonight that's getting the universal child tax credit paid directly to them, how they'd feel if that was eliminated. High tax deficit spending raises your taxes and kills job opportunity. Our kids need a chance. The universal child tax credit helps these kids raise their own children like I had. My mom was home and raised me. These kids can stay home and raise their kids and help with their small business. We can embrace these young people to accomplish their dreams.
Does a family making $500,000
With low tax
a year
plan,
need a
with
child
low
care
tax
benefit?
plan, with a low tax plan, providing these tax credits to our young families, it is a positive, not a negative, and it's proven.
Mr. Rafferty.
It is a positive. Let me do the math for you. So when this universal child credit, at least the Conservative plan came in, it seemed like an awful lot of money. But remember a couple of things. One is that it's taxed, of course. The second is that the child credit you used to get disappeared. So when that first came out, I was chatting to a chartered accountant friend of mine, and I said, well, what does this actually mean? What is this going to mean for actual dollars annually in a parent's pocket? He said he would estimate that an average family of four with an average middle-of-the-road income, I think he said $60,000 combined, and two children would mean $200 to $300 a year is what they would actually see. Everyone in Canada is being bribed with their own money on this. It's not the golden child that everyone seems to think it is, or certainly that Ms. Kamusi thinks it is.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
You want to get people out of poverty, you want to give them a hand up, give them a guaranteed livable income, not surreptitious tax credits that come when they feel like it. You want to give them a leg up, get some education funding. A significant portion of the young people in this community can't even think about accessing post-secondary education without also thinking about running a huge deficit. You want to talk about how you get money into the pockets of people in this community? Talk about carbon fee and dividend. Let's price carbon at its source. Let's start addressing the big elephant in the room, which is climate change, and let's take that money and give it back to every single Canadian as a dividend.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn to Mr. Patterson now, for your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to switch gears here to the other creatures that we share this world with. Ms. Kamusi, you've been endorsed by the Northwestern Ontario Sportsmen's Alliance because the Conservatives are said to be committed to Canada's hunting, fishing, and trapping heritage. But evidence points to a decided lack of Conservative government commitment to fish and game habitat. We've been talking about the importance of housing for people. Well, fish and wildlife need a house too, and it's in rough shape apparently. Endangered and threatened marine fish species in Canada routinely refuse protection by the federal government, contrary to their scientists' recommendations. That's according to a new University of Victoria study. The Conservative government made drastic changes to the Navigable Waters Act such that 99% of Canada's lakes and rivers are now excluded from federal oversight. That's pretty astounding. The former Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development for Canada said the country is failing its obligations to protect Canada's wildlife and natural spaces. Not surprisingly, perhaps Neil Maxwell has not been replaced in his job, or at least he was not invited to return. Ms. Kamusi, in the growing absence of this federal oversight, more of the burden of protecting the country's lands and waters is falling to people, concerned citizens, public interest groups, local businesses that are concerned about them and want to do something about it. In your view, is this right?
Okay, Ms. Kamusi?
In 2014, the National Conservation Plan set out an ambitious plan to secure ecologically sensitive lands, support voluntary conservation and restoration actions, and strengthen marine and coastal conservation. The sportsmen, the hunters and anglers, support the Conservative Party because we are the only party that has supported our way of life and protecting our habitat. That's our fisheries, that's our lakes. We all can live together, enjoy our way of life, and be conservationists. That's our policy.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
Having spent 7 years as a federal special agent with the Environmental Protection Agency, I can tell you that voluntary conservation or voluntary ecological protection doesn't work. It requires actual teeth for the legislation. The losers under the Harper government, yes, included the Navigable Waters Act and the Fisheries Act. And I can tell you that in this community alone, I worked with one of our organizations because that's what it's come down to. I've worked with several organizations. It's come down to community members required to take care of their waters because this government is refusing to do so. And it has no plans to include that later in the future. It was the Green Party who introduced and is now passed the National Marine Conservation Act, which is also bringing $38 billion to the North Shore right now. Additionally, it's the Green Party that is opposing dangerous pipeline and dangerous bitumen shipping projects on the West Coast that will threaten all of our marine ecosystems out there without an appropriate environmental assessment.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
I can tell you that all the opposition parties fought Stephen Harper on this, but of course it was included in one of his many omnibus bills, and maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that. But 99% of the protection has disappeared. In this riding, Rainy Lake and Rainy River are still protected. Do you know where most of the other ones are in Ontario? Tony Clement's riding in the Muskokas. Most of those lakes are still protected by the federal government. So, I mean, you can see what's been happening here. I just want to relate very quickly a story I received. I got a phone call I got from a woman who lived on a river that fed into Rainy Lake, and she said, "John, what can I do? My neighbor is dumping landfill into the river so he can give himself more land. He's dumping it in the river." And I said, you know, from a federal perspective, there's nothing you can do now. You can call the OPP. That's all you can do.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Mr. Resnick.
Well, I think it's clear that the Harper government over the last 10 years has gutted environmental regulation. It's the Liberal plan to bring back regulation and make sure companies pay if they pollute, but stronger to make sure that they don't, that we have the protections there for the environment. I'll tell you a little story about Clyde, and I won't give his last name, and from the Fort Francis area. He lives on a lake in the area there, and they had a problem with the railway, and the railway had a bridge, and they changed the bridge into a culvert. That changed the environment of the lake, and the lake switched over from a clear spring-fed lake to swampy, musky lake, and he had no recourse. He went to the federal government. He actually went to Mr. Rafferty for help, and Mr. Rafferty ignored him. But it's a problem, and the Liberals are going to address it.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn.
That's good to know, because we'll hold you to it when we get there. Because we were the first country to walk out of Kyoto, the first one, in 2011 under Harper. We've been waiting 20 years, almost 20 years, for somebody to do something about climate change, and that's directly related to the environment and pollution. And deals like TPP will only weaken our ability, even if Harper's gone. Deals like TPP will weaken our ability to protect our federal waterways, because every time we pass an environmental regulation that stifles economic development of a corporation, the foreign country that we're causing grief to can sue us. We are the most sued country under NAFTA. That's the kind of deals that Stephen Harper has made for us. He will hamper our ability to protect our waterways, our way of life. He will hamper our ability for good jobs in this country, and it will continue if we let the Liberals and the NDP let the TPP go through.
Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you very much. Just to correct Mr. Resnick with his friend Clyde, our friend Clyde, that was Nickel Lake. And I did approach the transport minister on his behalf and of all the cottagers in Nickel Lake. But apparently CN and CP have their own rule of law that they follow. And the transport minister was, I don't know, unable perhaps or unwilling to help out in that case. It may be a different one than Nickel Lake, I'm not sure, but...
Oh, that's it. I was having a beer with Clyde on his deck last week, me and my father in Nickel Lake, and he told me directly that you never got back to him.
Okay. Thank you.
We can call him after if you want, John. Maybe you can get back to him now.
Okay, thank you very much to the panel. Now I'm going to turn to the audience.
How did I know it was him then?
Have we got any people from the audience want to ask any questions? There's the mics here and there. If not, we'll go back to the media. Okay, over to mic number 2. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening. My name is Jim Colosimo. I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Diabetes Association. As a volunteer, I am a diabetic, and we can't wait. We need government leadership so that the risk of type 2 diabetes is reduced, so that every Canadian at least has a chance to handle their high costs of of health care, paying for their medicine, for their insulin, for the test strips, and we need them to be able to do that so that they can manage this disease. And that's why the Canadian Diabetes Association urges the federal parties to commit to, number one, a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, because there's a clear connection between high consumption of these drinks and the development of type 2 diabetes. Number
Mr.
two,
Commit, what's your question? You got a question?
yes, I have.
Okay, please.
Establish a national pharmacare program so that people with diabetes and complications can get the medication they need to manage the disease at affordable prices, and to expand the disability tax credit to include all people with type 1 diabetes, that they can get some financial relief to burden annual expenses. These three items are the things that we need the federal government to work on, because we can't wait. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right, Ms. Radburn, you want to start with that one?
Thank you for that question. We absolutely agree with you and have a plan to tax not only sugary drinks, but as well as those what we call junk food that continue to be perpetuated on especially our children in this community. The other piece of that is actually limiting their exposure. So that means controlling the advertising that those junk food companies get to do. Additionally, we do support a national pharmacare program, as well as supporting the additional costs of preventative programs, which mean education programs, rather than back-end loading our healthcare system. We absolutely believe we have to ascribe to the Health Care Act for universality, portability, public administration, accessibility, and comprehensiveness. So I appreciate your question, and we absolutely agree with you and the diabetes.
Any other candidates wish to speak to that? Mr.
Sure.
Rafferty.
When the $36 billion disappears from healthcare if Stephen Harper is elected, that will mean about $14 billion in Ontario. Any kind of initiative that you're talking about in that scenario, I don't see happening. I am very supportive of that, and I'm very supportive of expanding the disability tax credit to include that. I have often in the last before I was elected, used to run disability tax credit workshops, and we've been very successful for a whole lot of people in this riding. And while there is a fair amount of latitude in the federal disability tax credit, I would like to see more, and certainly to include your concerns.
Mr. Resnick, any comment?
Well, I agree with Christy that what we need to do is, and I go back to my experience in the criminal justice system, is prevention's a lot better than reacting after the crime has been committed. The Liberal plan is to invest $3 billion in the next 4 years in primary and improved care, home care for Canadians. We need to have prescription drug prices lowered, and getting to the second part of your question. The Liberal government's committed to working with the provinces, and before Stephen Harper took power, a bulk buying agreement with the provinces was killed by the Stephen Harper government, and it would have reduced prescription drug prices for Canadians. The Liberals plan to re-engage with the provinces and lower the price of prescription drugs for Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. Ms. Kamuzi.
Right now, there's an approximate $20 billion that comes out of the federal government into Ontario. Along with that, we have health tax credits and direct spending that totals an additional $9 billion a year. Ontario handles your health care. There's $20 billion comes into our province. What are we getting here locally? Why aren't we getting our fair share? We need to hold our MPPs accountable as to where Kathleen Wynne is spending our healthcare dollars. $20 billion, an additional $9 billion on top of that. We can afford a pharmacare at a provincial level with that kind of money, definitely.
Ms. Radburn.
The reality is it's the cuts in provincial transfers that have really created the crisis in healthcare. The failure to address poverty, housing costs, the failure to address all those social determinants of health, what that creates is a supposed crisis in our provincial healthcare systems that were directly created by the lack of federal funding. There's an utter failure in this country right now to address toxins in our environment, toxins in our food, toxins in our clothing, shelter, everywhere around us, and every single one of those contribute to rising healthcare costs. You know what? I think about Jane Goodall and her asking right now, how could we ever have believed that it was a good idea to grow our food with poisons? Yet we continue to see no federal action on regulating pesticides. We leave it, quote, up to the provinces.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to mic number 1, speaker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alan Campbell. I'm a service officer for the Royal Canadian Legion, branch number 5. My position is to assist veterans and their families when requested. I'm strictly a volunteer and do the best service possible within my scope, ability, and knowledge. The government closed the Veterans Affairs Office in early 2014. Approximately 2,000 client files were shipped to Shiloh, Manitoba. Another batch were sent to North Bay, Ontario. Many veterans have also fallen through the cracks. The office closure has put a real strain and inconvenience on veterans and their families. It has also increased the workload on Legion service officers who do not have the knowledge, time, nor the training to fill the void. If elected, what action will you and your party take to rectify this problem? Our veterans deserve our thanks, gratitude, and care. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Resnick, you want to start with that one, please?
A Liberal government will invest $80 million per year to create a new veterans education benefit that provides full support for the costing of up to 4 years of college, university, or technical education for veterans after the completion of service. 2, invest $100 million per year to expand support for families of veterans. 3, increase the veteran survivor pension from 50% to 70% so that surviving veterans and partners don't face a decline in the quality of life with the loss of a loved one. And 4, reopen the 9 veteran service centers, including the one here in Thunder Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. Mr. Rafferty, any comment?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you. Alan, thank you very much for that question. And I just want to say that I'm honored and have been honored to work with veterans and Veterans Affairs in this last Parliament. And so this is a very important issue for me. You've already heard, I think, numerous times that the NDP will open these, not just the office in Thunder Bay, but all of the offices again. Unfortunately, millions of dollars returned to the federal government to help balance the budget. That was millions of dollars from Veterans Affairs. And I'm reminded of a woman named Jenny Mignot. I met Jenny Mignot in my office. This is probably about 2 years ago now. And she came in with her husband. Her husband had PTSD, and she was advocating and still is advocating for more support for families and spouses. And she said to me, and this made a huge impact on me when she first said it, she said, "You should feel honored, John, because this is the first time in 3 years my husband's been out of the house." That's what's happened to veterans in this country under Stephen Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Ms. Radburn.
Yeah, not disagreeing at all with either my Liberal or my NDP counterparts. The Greens are committed to reopening veterans' offices as well, recognizing PTSD, providing supports for families of veterans. But it's simply unconscionable that right now we're looking at a government that advocates sending troops, more people, creating more veterans, yet refuses to support them when they get back home. That's just makes no sense. So we are committed with our partners here, and if we are elected, we'll hold them to their promises.
Thank you. Ms. Camuzzi?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. We are grateful for the service of our veterans. I am a Branch 5 Legion member. My Uncle Teddy was a World War II survivor. It was unacceptable in which the way that they treated local veterans. More dialogue and communication needed to be had. And we are very deeply sorry. And that apology was by removing Minister Julian Fantino. So on behalf of my government, I'm truly sorry for what happened. In the meantime, I'm here to represent our veterans. And right now, we have 25 frontline mental health clinics across Canada and 31 integrated personal support centers. So I will work on your behalf, and I'd be proud to do so. And thank you once again for your service.
Thank you, Ms. Camuzzi. Mr. Rafferty?
Alan, I'm sure you see not only modern veterans, but you also see Second World War and Korean veterans in your work at the Legion, and thank you for doing that with no help, with no financial help. And the Legion comes up with that money and makes that happen for veterans if they need some help. And I think that's wonderful. Thanks for that, Alan. But you know, I think everybody remembers Roy L'Amour with Mr. Fantino and the finger wagging incident, and Mr. Fantino, I can only describe it as going crazy at this veteran who was just trying to make a point, and so now our veterans, like Roy L'Amour, have a 1-800 number, or they go online and somehow try to find an answer to what they need. It's just well, it's unsupportable, first of all, but it's also unconscionable.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Ms. Camuso.
Or you could call your local MP, and they would work with you and provide supports. I'd be more than happy to do that. Our veterans are extremely important to this community and to me. And as sitting MP, that's their job, is to provide those supports, not make you call the 1-800 number. My office is open 24/7. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go to the speaker at mic number 2.
Good evening. Thank you for showing up tonight and everybody here. My name is David Monroe. I have been self-employed, run a business for 33 years, and my leanings, quite frankly, have been more conservative than anything. And tonight I found out where the employment is. It's in the Prime Minister's office for the people doing the media. In other words, holding back and telling the people what to say. Ms. Camuzzi, thank you very much for not answering the question that was put towards you of what happened to transparency. That just reaffirms my decision not to be going with Conservatives. I firmly believe it's up to our people in Ottawa representing us to actually have their own opinions listened to and not being given talking points and do not deviate. I think there's only been 3 speaking points you've had, and you stuck with it and failed to answer the questions as far as I'm concerned. I do have a question for the whole panel here. We have the Nuclear Energy of Canada, CANDU. At one time, we were leaders in nuclear reactors. That has become dirty politics, I guess, or dirty vision. What we haven't done is researched. Back in the 1950s, in the US, a proven technology called liquid salt reactors was developed, superior to the current light water reactors we have. They cannot melt down. They cannot blow up. They produce substantially more energy than current reactors. In fact, current reactors only use 3% of the energy, and then we have to bury that waste afterwards. We're going to spend $22 billion at last count to bury this. That waste can actually be recycled into new nuclear reactors that are safe. 97% of the energy can be used. That can be stored above ground for 100 years and then just disposed of because it is safe. Where is the energy thought here? We're talking only about oil in Canada. How about turning around and looking at energy as a whole thing? Because the world, according to the energy circuits out there, is growing by about 15% a year for energy needs. How are we going to get that? And Canada, if they put their minds to it, using the CANDU system, could rebuild a system that would make us energy leaders again.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Ms. Radburn to start on this one. Ms. Radburn?
The reality of it is Canada could do a lot in the green energy and green technology, but we don't under this current government. And I'm not so sure we're going to get there under others. As I said before, in 1997, we had an opportunity to step up and be a climate change leader as well, which is directly related to where we get our energy from, which is all carbon right now. That ability has been lost. We didn't step up, we didn't lead, we don't invest in it. We allow corporations to take that money and keep it, and they don't put it back into R&D. We're currently ranked 11th right now in R&D in green technologies and green energy technologies among OECD countries. There are countries far, far ahead of us in this arena, and the Greens' commitment is to invest specifically the tax kind of incentives, the incentivations that we want to give are to people who want to find out, just like you, about can-do and how we can make it happen here in this country and with our manufacturing infrastructure here in Ontario.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
Thank you for bringing that up, and I like how you phrased it, $22 billion at last count. Because we know it's going to be much more than that. The other thing that you didn't mention, of course, is the nuclear reactors we have in Ontario right now are all due for refurbishment in the next little while, to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. I have to admit that I don't know much about the CANDU reactor that you're talking about, but it certainly sounds like it might be an alternative to refurbishing old plants, if that's what the provincial government decides to do, and perhaps giving taxpayers in Ontario a bit of a better deal rather than the Bruce nuclear deal, which as you know, all the taxpayers in Ontario are on the hook for it, and the consortium that bought Bruce or leased Bruce nuclear, they get all the profits.
Mr. Resnick?
Well, energy and innovation are a problem here in northwestern Ontario and in the province right now. The Liberal Party's plan is to invest $100 million more each year in clean technology and clean technology producers, $200 million each year to support innovation in clean technologies and more, and in the natural resource sector. We need to invest in the people that are thinking of what's next. And that's the Liberal plan. We can announce billions of dollars for infrastructure programs, but if we don't have the foresight and looking ahead of the curve and doing those amazing things that our youth and entrepreneurs are doing here, if we don't invest in them, then we're never going to get ahead. Green technology is great, but there's something out there in the future that hopefully can be done here in Thunder Bay and done in northwestern Ontario, and we need to invest in that.
Thank you. Ms. Kamuzi.
$10 billion has already been invested in green infrastructure, energy efficiency, clean energy technologies, and cleaner fuels and smarter grids. We also have invested in world-class scientific research. In the meantime, we need to create jobs. We can't look at what ifs. Right now, we need jobs today. What can we do to create these good-paying, long-term jobs? Our government is committed to the environment, polluters pay. But we need to also have a good balance with business and the environment in order to provide our kids with good-paying, long-term jobs. So that's what this is about, job creations.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn.
Polluters don't pay here. The biggest carbon sink in the country, the tar sands, doesn't pay a dime. In fact, we're giving them $34 billion a year right now to do what they do. We have this government and no other government, the proposed government right now, has a big plan to get us off of carbon and get us off of oil at some point. The Greens do. We've actually thought it out and we've actually costed it out. We also have a carbon fee and dividend program, which the Globe and Mail has already explained is the soundest fiscal way to get us off of carbon and get us moving on climate change in this country. It is time that everybody get on the boat and get in it and start paddling. We are going to be in a world of hurt soon. The other piece of that is we are not a country based on scientific data right now. Former physicist Raymond Hoffel explained to you from Environment Canada that all of his 50 reports between 75 and 99 just vanished during the austerity measures to get rid of and to collapse scientific data in this country. There is no science out there right now that we're basing federal policy on. That's one thing the Greens are committed to restoring.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty, you had a further comment?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I wonder if you would be available at some point, either today or in the near future, to talk a little bit more about that. That'd be great. Thanks.
Ms. Kamuzi, you had another comment?
I do. We've banned coal-fired generating units, and we put strict regulations on emissions for automobiles. I mean, our government is committed to our environment as well as creating jobs. There has to be good balance. We have to have a good relationship with our businesses and the environment, and not having polluters randomly come into our country and pollute. That's not the way we do business here in Canada. Polluters pay. We need to create good jobs and also protect our environment. And our Prime Minister has proven leadership in this area. Not what-ifs and promises. This is proven leadership. We have job creation and low tax plan. It's proven.
Mr. Resnick.
Ms. Kamuzi must be speaking from her binder again, because Mr. Trudeau corrected your leader, Mr. Harper, that it was the Ontario government that shut down the coal-fired plants in Ontario to clean up the environment. I don't know what part the federal Conservative Party had in that, I imagine it's very little.
Mr. Resnick, I would disagree with you. Those
Ms.
are proven facts.
Ms. Radburn.
So first of all, the strategy that I heard is that it's leave it up to the provinces. And actually that's a strategy being touted by a couple parties here tonight, not just the Conservatives, and that is that the provinces will lead the way. Well, actually that's not how things work. If you're going to be a leader, you need to step up and be a leader, and that's the federal government's role. And as far as making polluters pay in this country, not allowing people to come in and pollute, perhaps they're not actually flocking here because of our income tax rate, but the TPP and NAFTA both allow corporations to sue our country over our own environmental regulations. We are hampered in actually taxing or pricing polluters because they have the ability to come after us for billions of dollars. Once again, I'll say it, we're the most sued country under NAFTA, and we just watched Harper tout the great TPP deal he made for us. And nobody has a clue what's in it. Nobody's seen it, nobody knows details of it, and nobody knows what that's gonna look like for Canada in the long run.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the speaker at the first mic, sir.
Thank you much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Wayne Teixeira. I certainly feel I'm among friends here tonight because I know most of the candidates personally. I attended last evening as well, and I would like to congratulate all of the candidates because I think you know your party platforms very, very well. For that reason, I have a different question. I'd like to know what you think about introducing a tax reform measure that would be of immense benefit to every family that files 2 income tax returns. When will we have the opportunity for a family income tax return?
Thank you.
Your thoughts?
Mr. Resnick.
Well, I think that's an excellent idea, Mr. Teixeira. What we need to do is have smart tax policy, and tax policy that helps the people that drive the economy. Right now, the Conservative Party has an income-splitting plan that Mr. Flaherty didn't support. After Mr. Flaherty passed away, Mr. Harper brought forth that income-splitting plan that benefits families that make over $200,000 a year. It's not a fair tax plan. What we need to do is have fair tax plans that are income tested, that benefit the majority in society, and the majority in society is the middle class.
Thank you. Ms. Kamuzi.
Our income splitting, universal child tax credit, the pension splitting for our seniors are proven programs that families are taking advantage of now. It's not pie in the sky. You're benefiting. Seniors today, you've heard my commercials. There's seniors benefiting at $2,000 a year in savings with the pension splitting, income splitting, the individual widower tax credit now that will come to you and your families. So we have proven programs that help on tax returns, and I do think that families can agree that they are helping with their income tax. Thank you.
Ms. Radburn.
As we've already heard tonight, the income splitting and both our universal child care taxes are not income tested. And I had a great question on Facebook, of all places, from an individual about the small business tax. What qualifies you for it? And the reason I asked that is because I think what they were getting at was a lot of people end up employing themselves. And the reason they employ themselves is to avoid some of the complex tax structures so they're not caught in a double bind. And that's one of the things that happens when tax regulations get out of control. We start creating enough loopholes so that people with the right accountants and the right kind of money can actually get pay less taxes than those of us that really can't afford that piece of it. And I know this from, 5 years I spent with actually 10 years spent with the Internal Revenue Service. And the tax code in the United States would fill up about half of this room. It's a phenomenal piece of information. But what happens is only people with money and access to accountants and other high-powered individuals can actually access some of those loopholes. So I think what you're looking for is a family tax structure that is simplified and that benefits actual families that need it in the middle class.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the question, Mr. Teixeira. I'm quite fascinated by it, actually, a family income tax return. So I don't know, Chair, is it okay to ask the questioner a question?
I guess we can do that.
So what do you envision? I mean, you've obviously given this lots of thought. What do you envision a family income tax return would look like as opposed to a single person's tax return?
Well, it's quite simple, Mr. Rafferty. A couple that is in the same household would file one tax return. It would get us off this track that is getting more and more complex with more and more income splitting or pension income splitting, etc. One tax return for the couple. If they're cohabiting, one tax return. Simple as that.
Thank you. Any further comments, Ms. Radburn?
So you're...
sorry, Mr. Rafferty, go ahead.
Sorry, so you're talking about reducing duplication? Is that what you're suggesting?
I thought, quite frankly, that Ms. Radburn would think it an obvious question to her because she has had the experience as an American citizen. Every American family files one income tax return. Can you imagine? It may be unfortunate for some tax accountants. There would be an awful lot less work to audit in Ottawa or Winnipeg or wherever the tax returns are audited. But quite frankly, we're fed up. The millions of Canadians that now cannot figure out the tax regulations and go to H&R Block and all the tax accountants. Quite frankly, it would cut them in half. 2/3 of this audience would file one tax return.
So you're not...
Go ahead, and then I'll turn to Ms. Radburn. Go ahead, Mr. Rafferty.
So you're not suggesting that families would get more income tax breaks than a single person. You're just saying, let's cut down the red tape. Let's make it easier for everybody.
Income splitting is solved. Pension income splitting is solved, right? It's one tax return.
Ms. Radburn.
Yeah, and thank you for re-clarifying. You're right. It's kind of a funny story. When I first moved here, actually my partner does all of the taxes in this country because I'm not sure that I'm very clear myself on it, because the first thing I says is, why am I filing a tax return and you're filing a tax return? Why aren't we filing a joint tax return? And only to find out that that's not an option here. So I fully understand, and that's what I meant by the tax code. The more we increase the regulations that allow loopholes or allow tax cuts and tax credits, we end up creating regulations and legislation that people can't work their way through, and it becomes quite a tax burden. But I guess maybe that creates jobs in a way.
Okay, I'm going to go to mic number 2, ma'am.
My name is Matsy Kenny, and I have a question about environmental protection. 2 of the candidates have stated that their priority for infrastructure, should they become the government, would be to develop the Ring of Fire. My concern is about the immense environmental impact such a huge development would have on our boreal forest ecosystem. So my question then is, would any party make a commitment to rescind some of the environmental, or to reinstate some of the environmental regulations that have been gutted by the Conservative Party in the last few years?
Thank you. I'm going to start with Mr. Rafferty.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, and absolutely, that's one of the reasons why we're actually in this election, to make those kind of changes back again. Now, I know you. I understand that you would have concerns about the Ring of Fire and that development, but just consider this: there are some positive environmental spin-offs. For example, there will be at least a minimum of 7 First Nations communities that would no longer be burning diesel 24/7, 365 days a year. They would have clean, renewable hydropower. That's a considerable makes a considerable environmental impact, a positive environmental impact. The other is about the infrastructure itself, the road itself. I'm sure that when it's done, they'll choose the road that goes over the Canadian Shield, so there's the least amount of impact. But the fact of the matter is that route with bush roads is only about 34 kilometers away from the Ring of Fire right now. So it's not a question of building that many new kilometers of road.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Ms. Radburn.
Yes, to answer your question simply, we would be interested in restoring all of the environmental protections that have been steadily eroded by this government. Additionally, the Ring of Fire is an interesting project. We hear a lot about how it's going to benefit First Nations communities, and I think if you ask, say, Attawapiskat about how much De Beers benefited their community, they'd have a lot to say about how little it actually did, whether it brought jobs, whether it brought infrastructure, whether it solved housing crises or education crises there, it didn't. So I question, when we haven't had realistic consultation or collaboration on that project yet, whether we're at that point. I also question who's doing the environmental assessment. If we know that the Environmental Assessment Act's been gutted and we know that it's not appropriate, how can we say that the environmental assessment that says we're only going to build so many roads over certain parts of the boreal isn't going to damage it? We know that that act's been gutted by this government. We know that it's not appropriate. So we know that those findings are in question. So we have a lot to do, a lot of work to do before we start developing the Ring of Fire.
Thank you. Ms. Kamuzi.
Developing the Ring of Fire has 3 different groups involved: First Nations, our communities, municipalities, there's more in the province. We all are concerned about our natural habitat and our boreal forests. Working together, we will protect, obviously, those areas, but this is a job creation project that, working with all the stakeholders, being responsible to our environment, that comes without saying. It's our environment. In the meantime, we create energy for our communities, education, roads, bridges, infrastructure, education, skills and training. It's mind-boggling, it's endless. But we need to work together to preserve our communities and our environments.
Thank you. Mr. Resnick?
To answer your question, yes. Restore robust oversight, and what Stephen Harper's removed from our environmental regulation, the Liberal Party is going to bring back, and stronger. The Ring of Fire gets a lot of play. We're Thunder Bay Rainy River candidates, and I was at, I think it was 2 weeks ago, New Gold's project north of Emo. And it's an amazing project, right? So it can be a lesson for people negotiating the Ring of Fire. Rainy River First Nations is a big partner with New Gold, and they actually, one of the companies that is run by First Nations runs the camp there. They have people working from Alberta, people from the First Nation working there. They have more jobs than they have people in their community to work for. So that's a community, and that's a project that's been doing it right, and it involves everyone, for the benefit of everyone. And we need to do that with the Ring of Fire. It may take a while, but it has to be done right, and New Gold could be an example.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
Let me expand on Mr. Rusnick's comments, because he's absolutely right. One of the reasons Mr. Harper has been so unsuccessful in terms of getting his big projects through, I'll just use Northern Gateway as an example, it's because he doesn't have a social contract. He doesn't have the buy-in and the agreement of all the stakeholders. New Gold is a good example in the west end of this riding. New Gold is a very good example of the new way of doing things to make sure it works for everybody. Now, that's it's in the construction phase right now. I think there are about 200 jobs or so. 420. 420. 200 jobs, I think, after the construction phase is finished. And so it's a good example of everybody going through the proper consultations, everybody agreeing and moving ahead with a project that has about a life of about 20 years. So a lot of work has gone in to make that happen.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn.
And again, I caution us, we have a 100-year surplus of chromium, which is what we're going to pull out of the Ring of Fire. And that 100-year surplus is what's used to make steel. And the place that all that chromium is supposed to go to make steel is China. Now, I'm not sure how the folks in Sudbury or Nickel Country or anywhere else manufacturing that's lost in this province feel about it. But if we're going to pull things out of the ground, we need a long-term commitment to how we're going to fix it when we get done with it, and we don't have that right now. We don't require it, and it's not something that's happening. The other piece is, if we're going to pull it out of the ground here, why in the world are we selling it cheaply to a foreign country? Why aren't we keeping it right here and doing the secondary and the tertiary manufacturing and creating those real jobs that we're looking for, while also being environmentally responsible and thinking about how this looks in the future?
Thank you. I'll go to the speaker here, Mr. Sir.
Thank you. We've heard a lot about the middle class, helping the middle class tonight. In 2008, the government created tax-free savings accounts to help the middle class save. Yet, two parties up there do want to reduce the limits. How does this help the middle class?
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Radburn. Ms. Radburn?
Well, the tax-free savings account, we started one, and we have maybe a couple $100s in it. I'm in the middle class, sitting right there with you. The tax-free savings account certainly benefits the very wealthy. And once again, we get back into the same kind of regulatory scheme with income splitting, universal child care tax credits. Those can afford to access them, they do. Those that can't, don't. And that's pretty simple. So, you know, we don't want to take away things from people and their ability to actually save money. But first we have to fix some of the other ills before we go there. And as Mr. Teixeira related to, we don't need more tax regulations. We need to simplify it.
Thank you. Ms. Camuzzi.
Right now, our government has a tax-free savings account for seniors. It's up to $10,000 a year. It's important. Our seniors, it helps them, along with their pension splitting and their individual widower tax credit. It's not something that we're going to eliminate. It's there. It should be utilized by as many seniors as you can, and it's a useful tax-free savings account that helps with families. Thanks.
Mr. Resnick.
Well, I'm glad that Ms. Camuzzi mentioned income splitting for seniors, because she's been, or maybe not her, but people in her party has been spreading misinformation about the Liberal Party's platform, and we're not going to cancel pension splitting for seniors. Just to make that clear. The tax-free savings account, and again, it's something that was a struggle with the federal Conservative Party, raising the level to $10,000. I do all right as a lawyer here in Thunder Bay, and I don't know if I could throw in $10,000 into a tax-free savings account. That's pretty rich, and it's going to cost the Canadian government a lot of money. $5,000 is where the Liberal Party wants to keep the tax-free savings account, and it is a great vehicle. I use it myself, and I know a lot of people that use it for retirement planning.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
The question you need to ask yourself when you talk about these things is, who is it going to benefit? And I think we have seen pretty clearly, and certainly seniors I've talked to, that senior income splitting works for many, many seniors. I think there's misinformation about us too on that. No, we're going to keep that, of course. But income splitting, we know that income splitting for families only helps the top 15% wage earners in Canada. We think we can do better in terms of what that's going to cost the government. In terms of your question, we believe it should be back at $5,500. That's where it should be. The move to $10,000. You know, I don't know what your definition of middle class is, but those who can afford $10,000 annually into a tax-free savings account are not what I would call middle class families.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Okay, I'll go to mic number 2.
My question to the candidates is about the Senate. My question is, would you abolish it? Would you keep it the same? Or would you reform it?
Ms. Camuzzi, you want to start with that one?
Thank you very much for the question. The Senate does serve a purpose, and all legislation has to be passed through the Senate before it becomes official law. So if you alleviate or eliminate the Senate, then you're leaving everything up to the Prime Minister. Like, what kind of dictatorship would that be? The Senate serves a purpose, and that's what it serves.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn.
By the way,
the Senate passes and approves it before it becomes official law. I mean, so if you don't have a Senate, then what happens? You have a prime minister that makes all the decisions and passes all the laws. No?
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
Yeah, we would abolish it. Actually, I'll tell you a short story. I found it astonishing that you have a political body that has that kind of influence that's appointed, not elected. If you were going to reform it, you would absolutely have to have it elected. And case in point, the only climate change legislation ever passed through the House and or the Parliament in this country, introduced by Bruce Heyer, was killed in the Senate by specific direction by the dictator that we have running our country right now. So we would abolish it, and if you need another body, then we would elect it. And we would also not do it first past the post.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
I think our position has always been quite clear on this, not just in the recent trials and tribulations, not because of the latest trials and tribulations of the Senate. You'll remember back in the 80s, Mr. Mulrooney had the same kind of problems that Mr. Harper's having right now with the Senate, and it has been ongoing. You know, it's filled with bagmen and failed candidates and all sorts of pals. If let me just suggest this. If from the very beginning, 148 years ago, care had been taken to make the Senate useful, to fill the Senate with people who should be in an appointed body like that, perhaps we wouldn't have these problems that we have right now. But we feel that it's time to enter into negotiations with the provinces and territories to begin the end of the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick.
Well, I'll just address that point quickly. Ontario and Quebec said no already. So and Christy may have not have been in Canada long enough to remember Meech Lake and Charlottetown and the mess that caused. The Liberals would rather talk about jobs in the economy than getting into a constitutional battle right now. And being a former prosecutor, I know a little bit about the criminal justice system, and never have I seen a prime minister appoint more accused or convicted criminals to the Senate. In any event, Stephen Harper said he was going to reform the Senate. He didn't do it. Justin Trudeau has a plan to negotiate with the provinces to make the Senate work for us. All the Liberal senators that were there are no longer Liberal senators. He threw them out of caucus.
Ms. Camuzzi.
So we got the Senate question out of the way. How are we going to create jobs in Thunder Bay, Rainy River? And I will come back to it, and you may laugh, but our kids need good-paying, long-term jobs. Mr. Rafferty has sat for 2 terms, that's 7 years, and has done nothing to create a job. Mr. Rusnak, he wants to talk about deficit spending and increasing taxes and killing jobs. I want to know how we will create good-paying jobs in this community. It's not about the Senate. We'll leave that to the government to figure that out. Right here is local, and we need to figure this out and do it quickly, because we've had nothing for 2 terms and 7 year under our current NDP MP. Thank you.
Ms. Radburn.
We need to stop shipping jobs offshore to other countries and stop shipping all our resources offshore to other countries. We need to invest in education. We need to give people a guaranteed livable income so they can invest in education, so that they can stop and take a moment to get a real job. We need to support small businesses which produce 80% of the jobs in this country. Those are what we do to create real jobs in this community.
Thank you. I'm going to go to mic number 1.
My name is Sylvia Skrepichuk, and I'd like to address a question that hasn't been raised here, and that's on foreign policy. Canada used to be known as a peacekeeping nation, as a very generous nation, and as a very balanced nation. Today, I'm not even sure how many peacekeepers we have, but we rank near the lowest in the world in terms of supplying peacekeepers. We're far more of a militaristic power. As I said, we used to be known as a generous country. In fact, a former Prime Minister, Lester Pearson, had set a global mark of 0.7% of the gross national product to be given to other countries in the global south. We've never reached that, nor has any other country, I don't think, but at least some countries now are aiming for it. In fact, Canada is decreasing, and we are now at 0.25% and dropping even there. Even so, the aid that is given, CETA no longer exists. It's been rolled into I forget the name of it, but it was with industry, and the money that's allotted to NGOs, those NGOs have to bid on contracts, and they're often tied to Canadian mining companies that have a terrible reputation globally. We were also a balanced country and very well respected throughout the world. In 2012, we were not accepted onto the Security Council because of our reputation of what's happened under the Harper government. In fact...
Have we got a question, please?
Yeah. One more thing. In terms of Israel, we have a very ideological approach as opposed to a principled approach. I want to know what each one of these candidates will do, or their parties, in terms of restoring Canada's image throughout the world.
Thank you. Mr. Rusnick, do you want to start with that one?
Well, a fundamental role of the federal government is to lead in international relations, and our party, our country has been decimated in the international community by the Harper Conservative government. You hear stories of people being harassed and insulted when they travel the world now. It used to be a badge of honor to wear the maple leaf while you're traveling the world. We can't do that anymore. The other thing, because of Harper's ideological stand on certain issues in the world, we can no longer be honest brokers. We can't go into a country anymore and say we're peacekeepers. We've taken a side and based on ideology, and that's just wrong, and the Liberal government's going to correct that.
Thank you. Ms. Kmusi.
There's three things that the Prime Minister says he's going to do. He's kept our taxes low, he's created jobs, and kept Canadians safe. This is the keeping Canadians safe part. With humanitarian aid, immigration aid, and military aid, that's how he's doing it. Some folks don't want to leave their country, so they need help to stay there. That's our military aid. You have two parties that will turn their back on military aid. We are dealing with sophisticated terrorists. They're in our homes. They're homegrown. I mean, you have homegrown business. What do you think? How do you think Parliament Hill happened? Just because, I mean, the guy all of a sudden, he was in Canada. So it's keeping Canadians safe. It's important. And three-prong approach, humanitarian aid, immigration, and military. It's a must to keep Canadians safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn.
First of all, C-51 and other of our immigration policies are a direct result of the fear-mongering we're just hearing. Having worked in domestic terrorism for 6 years with the Internal Revenue Service, that meant working anti-government groups, neo-Nazi groups, and militias, I understand quite clearly how we create terrorists on our soil. And the way we do it is by vilifying people who are different, isolating people for their differences, not providing for their basic needs. That's how you create a terrorist in your own country. I've seen it happen, and I've worked it. We are a disgrace right now, and when we talk about the Syrian refugee crisis, we denied people. We have the least amount of aid going to Syria or coming back from Syria. Our party would ramp up not only the number of refugees allowed to 25,000, we'd also take our place on the world stage and rebuild those trust and relationships that allow us to be the negotiators of peace.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
For the last decade, and the questioner is absolutely right, for the last decade we have failed to live up to our international commitments. That's it, pure and simple. I believe that Canada should be a force for peace and a force for development. The first thing that Mr. Harper did was he changed our international focus from the poorest of the poor, which usually meant Africa, in most cases, and South America, changed our focus from the poorest of the poor to who can we do trade deals with. And that was a conscious choice. He came under fire for it, but apparently not enough fire because he was elected back with the majority. I spent 6.5 years working overseas with the Canadian NGO, World University Service of Canada, first as a volunteer in West Africa, northeastern Nigeria, where Boko Haram is right now, so I follow all that very closely. Young people don't get that opportunity anymore. We don't put that face to the world anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty.
And the NDP will change that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask the people at the mics just to stand down for a few minutes. I'm going to go back to our panel And maybe Mr. Patterson, if you've got another question for the candidates.
Certainly, thank you. Mr. Rafferty, I received an automated phone call at my home from your campaign on Monday, and your voice, a recording of it, told me that Thunder Bay Rainy River is a race between the NDP and the Conservatives, between you and Ms. Kamuzi. Today's polling numbers on the usually reliable 308.com website suggest that if there's a race at all, it's between you at 43% and Mr. Rusnak at 32%. Ms. Kamuzi, pardon me, has 21% support, and Ms. Radburn something less than that. Was Monday's robocall out of date? Or is this a tactical move to get more NDP voters to the polls by suggesting you could lose to the Conservatives? And to all candidates, what is your own polling telling you about your place in the race?
Okay, Mr. Rafferty, you lead it off, please.
Well, that's a good question. And certainly if you look at the 2011 results, you will see, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think I won with 18,000 votes. Ms. Kamuzi was next with 10,000 some odd votes, and the Liberal had 8,000 votes. So everyone in this space, in this room, is probably familiar with what can happen when you split the vote. And in this particular case, with the NDP and the Liberals, the second place from 2011 numerically could slip up through the middle. And I think we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. The polls are changing, of course, as you do indicate. 308 is an unusual website because they don't actually do any polling, so I don't know how they come up with those numbers, but at least they say they don't do any polling.
Mr. Rusnak.
I believe 308.com is an amalgam of all available polls.
I think Mr. Rafferty's answer is, yeah, that robocall was a little bit out of date if he's talking about 2011 numbers. In any event, our polling number shows it's a battle between myself and Mr. Rafferty, and we're closer than 308's polls would have you imagine. It is a contest between the NDP here in Thunder Bay Rainy River and the Liberal Party. We've seen the NDP slip in the polls nationally, and they're not an answer to defeating Stephen Harper anymore. They're gone so far. One poll today, a Nanos poll, showed them down to 20%. The NDP aren't going to do it. Mulcair's training wheels are falling off his platform. It's a platform of smoke and mirrors. Justin Trudeau's plan is resonating with Canadians, and it's showing in the polls. The Liberal plan is the plan that will defeat Stephen Harper.
Ms. Kamuzi.
Thank you. I was told long ago by a well-known, long-time Conservative MP, don't look at the polls, look at your community. You have a sitting MP that sat for 2 terms and has done nothing to create a job. You have a Liberal candidate who runs with a leader who wants to raise our taxes, run deficit spending. We need leadership in this community to provide good paying jobs for our kids and for their futures. We need to embrace the money that we've already gotten from the Conservatives in the cyclotron, the Health Sciences Research Institute, the portion of our federal portion in Highway 1117 being twinned. We need to connect our communities so we can do business and get our kids home safe and create job opportunity. Neither of these two are going to do that. They're going to raise your taxes and they're going to kill job opportunity. So if you want a job for your family, vote Mo, because I will get you jobs.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn.
Here's the good news. You won't get a robocall from my campaign because we're not financed by any big businesses or corporations. So the myth of strategic voting, let's put that out on the table right now. The only vote that's lost in an election is a vote thrown away on an individual who might sit as a political backbencher, a cog in a vast political machine, or relegated to the sidelines of decision-making in a token position. Or someone or a party who doesn't represent the beliefs or change you really want to see. The Green Party will pick up seats this year. They may not be this one in Thunder Bay Rainy River. We'll pick up 6 to 10 seats. We will hold the balance of power, and we will be the ones that will hold these people to their promises. And that's what this country needs, because if we're really going to change things, then we can't simply keep doing things the same way we've done it. Folks, They've had another 7 years, and before that, the Liberals had several years to make a change in this country, and it hasn't happened yet. So I submit to you that you will be looking to Green, if not today, for the future. Mr.
Rafferty.
Well, it's interesting that Ms. Kamuzi talks about needing leadership, and that's exactly what Tom Mulcair provides, principled leadership. When you see the numbers start to fall, a lot of that is Quebec. I think you probably agree, because he took a principled stand about women and oath-taking and covering their faces. It was not popular in Quebec. Quebecers don't want, like as conservatives do, they don't want women to cover their faces when they take an oath. If we lose support in Quebec because of that stand, I'm proud of that stand. I'm proud of Tom Mulcair and being principled. If we lose some points in the polls because of it, that's the way it has to be.
Your bell went off, I think.
Mr. Rusnick, go ahead.
Well, speaking of a principled stand, I wonder if Mr. Rafferty could explain the NDP party's policy called the Sherbrooke Declaration, where they would allow Quebec to split with 50% plus one of the vote. Is that not pandering to Quebec votes?
I can certainly
go ahead.
talk about that. That was 2005, and Jack Layton, and it was at a convention. Unlike some of the other parties, we have all our members across Canada make these decisions, and it was 50 plus 1. Now, you can talk to any mathematician. They will tell you that 50 plus 1 is a majority.
To break up Canada, John.
Under Dionne's so-called Clarity Act, it's not very clear. It's unclear. Does that mean that the federal government will set the rules if it ever comes up again? And by the way, there is no appetite in Quebec for that right now. If it does come back up again, what will the federal government do under the Clarity Act and Mr. Dionne? Well, they'll make it 68% is the majority you have to have, or it'll be 75% of the majority you have to have. I think you have to be clear, and the Sherbrooke Declaration is clear.
Ms. Radburn.
The Greens forced Harper to recognize the Truth and Reconciliation Report. Many people don't know that. They used a parliamentary rule to hold up Parliament long enough to force them to do it. They opposed Bill C-51 first. They passed the first and only climate legislation in the House. They also were the only two MPs who voted against the Canada-Korea trade agreement, which ended up with Korea banning Canadian beef and not actually benefiting the people they said it would. Two people in a party do have power in a party, and the 6-10 will hold that balance. Strategic voting, in 80 years, 80 plus years, a Conservative hasn't won in Thunder Bay, and they're not about to start on October 19th this year. So you think about who you want to represent you, who will stand up, who will ensure that the promises are kept when you go to the polls.
Okay, I'll turn to Lisa Laco. Lisa?
This week here in Thunder Bay started the largest coroner's inquest in Ontario's history, looking into the deaths of 7 young people, First Nations students, who are attending school here in Thunder Bay. A lot of the testimony has been about funding for education for Aboriginal students, and the testimony today in particular focused on the fact that Aboriginal education is not funded to the same level of provincial standards here in Ontario, and it's in fact funded federally. What is your position on equalizing the education funding for Aboriginal students in Ontario?
Okay, Ms. Radburn, I'll start with you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, absolutely. The Conservative government committed more money to Canada's 150th birthday than to federal Aboriginal education. The continued failure to consult with communities and First Nation, Métis, and Inuit leaders on education has led to a place where you have a substandard education system operating with less funds than any other provincial school. The piece that people are missing is that without collaboration, without understanding what our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities want for their education piece, is where we're missing the vote. If they need to repeal the Indian Act and that's what they want to do, that's what we're in favor of. Additionally, if we need to support the Red Paper and its recommendations for Aboriginal education, that's what the Green Party is committed to doing. We're the party that not only held the Parliament to recognize the Truth and Reconciliation Report, but also are going to require Parliament to fully implement all of its recommendations. We are committed to improving First Nations education across this country.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
Well, under Mr. Harper, a First Nations child is not equal, not the same, on the same level as every other child in Canada, and that's wrong. We have already committed to closing that gap. In Ontario, it's about 2/3. So a First Nations child will receive about 2/3 the funding from the federal government than the province gives to every other child in this province. Now, what that means is that if you have a reserve with a school on the reserve, that's 2/3 less funding than any other school gets. And what that means is your library doesn't work, you don't have teachers, you don't have housing for teachers, your school doesn't work. But if you as we do in my riding quite a bit in the West End, if students are bused into town, into a public school or a Catholic school, what happens is they run out of funding partway through the year. So if there's an educational assistant, for example, that's there to help First Nations children in JK, SK at the beginning of their school career in particular, they're laid off in February. They're laid off in February because the money's run out.
Mr. Rusnick.
We'll fix that.
So I worked for an organization in Kenora, Grand Council Treaty 3. I was the executive director, and I've dealt with First Nation communities a lot while I worked for them, but I've dealt with them all my life, and it's not just about money. There's problems with funding. They're underfunded. The Liberal Party is committed to removing the 2% cap and spend $2.6 billion. So we can talk about all the money going into it, but it's about the process and the decision-making power. First Nations don't want to be told what to do. They've been told what to do during the residential school situation here in Canada. They want to make their own choices, and they want to teach their children their way. The Liberal Party is committed to that, to listening to First Nations, not telling them how it's going to be, and that's what the Liberal Party is committed to.
Thank you. Ms. Kamuzi.
First of all, to be really clear, in 100 years, our Prime Minister was the only Prime Minister to apologize for the heinous crimes that were committed on the residential school, with the residential schools. We've also committed $500 million of investment to construct and renovate schools on reserve, $200 million over 5 years to improve First Nation education, and $12 million over 3 years for post-secondary scholarships and bursaries. That's not a government that's not committed to educating all our kids, because all our kids are important, and good paying jobs and opportunities are as well.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty?
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Rusnick is correct in his first statement about the platform, the education platform for First Nations peoples. In that Mr. Trudeau 6 weeks ago promised that he would spend $2.6 billion on First Nations education. But on page 15 of the recently released platform, you can see they actually only plan to spend $900 million over 4 years for First Nations education. That means they've already cut $1.7 billion from their $2.6 billion pledge to First Nations education. I don't know how that's explained.
Thank you, John, for clarifying our policy.
Ms. Radburn next, and then I'll get to you. Ms. Radburn?
And I want to go back to something Mr. Rusnak said. It is about self-determination, and that's ultimately, for those who aren't aware, the red paper was about self-determination because it was in direct response to Trudeau's white paper, which was not about self-determination in Aboriginal education. So there is, and not this Trudeau, that would be the other Trudeau. There is a disconnect in how we communicate. And, you know, somebody gave me a little piece of advice this summer. You can communicate with parties in 3 different ways. You can inform them, you can collaborate with them, or you can consult with them. So inform is when I tell you what I'm going to do, and I think we can all agree on where that's coming from up here. Consult is when you say, well, I'll listen to what you think, I'll take it under consideration, and I may or may not do something about it. And I'll submit that that's what we've been doing for the last, 150, 200 years. Not even. And collaboration means we actually work together on what the solution is, and we take into account actually what your suggestions are, and we promise to do them.
Thank you,
and
Ms.
that's
Radburn.
something I'd like to see as a commitment.
Mr. Rusnick.
So John talks about the Liberal Party already cutting money that they promised for First Nation education, and that's just a falsehood. The money, as John's talking about, is over the period of I believe it was 4 years. There was money that wasn't allocated, like a lot of programs, and John will agree with me on this, that the federal Conservatives haven't spent on. And I believe the number was $560 million that wasn't spent on First Nation education. That amount is what the Liberals pledged to spend on First Nation education, and the total makes up $2.6 billion. But again, it's not about money. It's about having First Nations make the choice, make their choices on how their children get educated and raised.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Leith. Leith, your question?
We've heard a lot in recent weeks about water and First Nations communities. What specifically will you do, if elected, to ensure that every community in this riding has access to safe drinking water?
Thank you. We'll start with Mo Kamuzi. Ms. Kamuzi?
We all can agree that safe drinking water is an essential need for all of us. Our government has been committed that when we develop such projects such as the Ring of Fire, that all communities have safe drinking water. It's part of our daily survival. Education and skills training and job creation and making people part of our communities and opportunities for good paying jobs and potable water is part of our daily survival. It's a commitment that we will invest in, we have, with the money that we're spending on our First Nation reserves. The opportunities are there. We just need to embrace them. We need to work with these communities to ensure that everyone has safe, potable water. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
Well, first, the Greens are committed to protecting water across the board in this country, but we also are committed to infrastructure development in First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities that is not tied to potential development projects that may or may not happen. We're actually going to try to ensure that we invest first and not after we get money from some potential project 20 years down the road.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty?
When you watch the news tonight, you will see Tom Mulcair talking about First Nations issues and addressing First Nations in Alberta, and in fact he's in Kenora today, and also in a First Nations at the southern part of the Kenora riding that has some issues with water and some other issues. So he's being very clear today that gap needs to be closed. We can't have First Nations with boil water advisories for 2 decades or 3 decades or 4 decades with nothing being done. One of the things that Tom has promised to do is to sit down with the provinces. Now, as you know, Mr. Harper refuses to sit down with the provinces, with the premiers. Tom Mulcair has said he will do it twice a year. And when you talk about First Nations water, it's also about training and development and making sure those water systems work and how that training happens. And so you can't do it just as a federal government. You must do it along with the province.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Mr. Rusnick.
Well, both John and Mo talked about First Nation water. I go back to my experience at Grand Council Treaty 3. I know Shoal Lake had some problems with their water, and when the lake that separates them from the mainland actually feeds the city of Winnipeg. In any event, most of the communities in Treaty 3 in the southern area are fine with water. Of course, they still have problems, and John's right that there needs to be training there, and there needs to be cooperation with municipalities in the province, and that just makes sense, and First Nation communities want that. Now, talking about I think Ms. Kamuzi was mentioning the Ring of Fire, and we know that our northern communities have a lot of problems. They're not in the riding, but they're an important part of the Liberal plan to make sure that everyone has safe communities and the safe things that they need in their communities.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
Going back to those potable water issues, Shoal Lake number 40, not only does its lake feed Winnipeg, not only does it provide clean water to Winnipeg, they can't get clean water into them because their bridge infrastructure system is broke and no one's willing to rebuild it right now. So the Greens have been calling on the provincial government, the federal government, and specifically Mr. Harper, to rebuild that bridge and also figure out how you're going to ensure that they have a permanent potable water resource from here on out. We've been talking about, we're potable water, and we're talking about this. The UN gave us one of the worst report cards in the world when it comes to our First Nations communities, and we've been talking about it for years. And it's interesting to me that we're just now got a plan together to address it. Are we saying that we didn't think about it before, or we just didn't have the wherewithal, or we just didn't have the money, or we just didn't get around to it? Because other governments have been in place besides Harper, and nothing has changed.
Thank you. Ms. Kamuzi.
Our government has committed to money for skills development and training. With the Ring of Fire, I know we keep talking about it, that's our next big boom. That's working with First Nations so they can look after their communities, have training available so folks can look after their own, First Nation folks can look after their own communities. It's part of developing the Ring of Fire, being sure we have adequate roads, but the province has to get their infrastructure plan completed in order for us to move forward to help First Nation communities, to help create job opportunities for us here in Thunder Bay and Rainy River. That's the issue right now, to create more jobs and help these communities help themselves as well.
Mr. Resnick.
I'll go back to New Gold and the relationships that they have with the local municipalities and the First Nations in the area. And again, that's just one model, but they make the decisions and it's good for everyone in the region. I know Chief Jim Leonard from Rainy River First Nations. They've had a lot of experience in business and dealing with municipalities, the federal and the provincial government. And I know they'd be willing to assist Northern First Nations. Not that Northern First Nations would want their assistance, but those are the relationships that we need to build. So with the Chief of Webequie, Martin Falls, and Fort Hope, and some of the First Nations in the Ring of Fire area, you need to settle or get agreements with those communities that benefit them. And I have the connections and partnerships already to make that happen. Mr. Rafferty's been there for 7 years and doesn't have the connections and won't have the connections.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
The boom and bust economies are not sustainable. They just aren't. We can't keep waiting for the next great boom to happen, and that will somehow drag us out of our economic recession and somehow create these magic jobs. That is not a sustainable way to run a country, not a sustainable way to run a community. We need real jobs that are going to be there for the long term. The abject poverty and third world conditions in some of our First Nations community, exponential rates of addiction, the inadequate housing, inadequate food supplies, inadequate energy do not make it easy for you to jump up and run down here, because that's where you got to come and get your education. If you want to get skills training, it's here. They don't have, Conn College doesn't have a satellite campus up in Attawapiskat or any other of the First Nation communities up north. If you want that education, and that's why we started the question with the inquest into deaths. Those children are shipped from their homes and brought to a community that is often 5, 7, 10, 12 times the size of their home community without connections. And there's nothing to support them in that. To suggest that training them for a job in a mine is going to fix the problems on First Nations communities is just really inadequate.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Vic Krasowski now for his question. Vic?
Thank you very much, Keith. Interested to know what your assessment is of our port right now, and is there anything the government can do to grow the business that's coming through there? Is further investment required? Can jobs be kept intact, or are we the residual port for grain that was once predicted we would be?
Mr. Rafferty, you want to start with that one, please?
Yeah, sure. And if you've seen the most recent numbers, the Port of Thunder Bay has put some record numbers of grain through. But I just want to address another issue, and that's, of course, the disappearance of the wheat board. What that means is not so much for the Port of Thunder Bay that there's going to be a huge fluctuation in the amount of grain that comes through, but what that means is that the small grain farmers in the prairies are going to lose their farms. The time will come when they can't market properly. It was the small grain farmers that needed the wheat board. The large farmers never did need the wheat board. They were fine. They had enough clout that they could move their grain any way they wanted to. But small farmers are the ones that are in trouble. And we've also seen with the transportation system, of course, that grain was not moving. Grain was not moving until the minister stepped in with some fines that, well, she didn't really give them fines, but you know, they did put a couple
Thank
more
you,
grain
Mr.
cars on.
Rafferty.
But the small farmers are the ones that suffer.
Ms. Radburn?
Yeah, I'd like to see our report, that infrastructure piece be developed. Obviously, we know that the wheat is increasing. It's one of the few things that's coming out of here that's increasing. But we're also missing the boat on the opportunity to be shipping green technology and green manufactured goods, secondary and tertiary, out of this port. I want to, though, address that sort of wheat question again. Yeah, Mr. Rafferty is absolutely correct. Small farmers and medium farmers suffered from that transport. And part of the reason our port suffers is, believe it or not, climate change, because we're eventually going to be able to ship right out of Churchill, Manitoba, and go right through the Northern Passage because we've melted all the icebergs. So I guess if we keep up with that, that's one way we're going to lose from here. Another way is that we keep shipping our wheat out of the West and into China. So we're putting on trains and we're shipping it over to Vancouver and shipping it out of their port. So we're failing to bring it here. So there's a lot of reasons that our port failed. Some of it were tax reform back in the 80s, but not failed, but is moderately struggling. But we have an opportunity to make it, again, the center and the largest shipping port by increasing the number of manufactured goods that we can send out of it.
Thank you. Ms. Camuzzi.
Recently, you've heard about the TPP deal, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It'll create 1 million jobs, 800 million new customers, consumers, that we'll have access to. Our grain, our dairy farmers, all will benefit. We need to connect our communities with a proper highway. We need to continue trying to get the province to get the Ring of Fire moving and get their infrastructure plan done. This will connect our worlds, connect our communities, increase our grain. By doing this, by creating projects such as the Ring of Fire, what you're doing is increasing your population. You're increasing the opportunity for more small businesses to come to this community. It is the engine to our Canadian environment. It is what drives Canada, is our small businesses. We need to get our grips around this Ring of Fire and make it happen with the province. That's how we're going to create more opportunity.
Mr. Resnick?
The Port of Thunder Bay is an amazing asset here, and I'm sure a lot of people here in the audience have traveled through Duluth or to Duluth and see the activity in their port. There's a lot going on there, and there's a lot more the federal government could be doing. I believe it was the Port Authority or Kiefer, and I don't know their relationship, but they got a new crane recently. And those are the type of things in terms of financing and helping out with other infrastructure at the port that the federal government could be doing to help those hardworking people at Kiefer and the Thunder Bay Port Authority get new contracts and get new jobs there. Those are the things that our MP needs to advocate for and assist with. Assist with Industry Canada people in the bureaucracy in Ottawa, and make sure you open the doors for the people here that are working so hard to keep jobs here and get new jobs.
Thank you. Ms. Radburn?
GATT means that we already trade with those countries, that we are supposedly guaranteed trade routes with the TPP. The only thing the TPP is going to do, and one of the reasons we've opposed it and will continue to oppose it, is it increases pharmaceutical drug prices. It increases the investor-state agreements in which foreign corporations will have superior rights over domestic corporations to complain and sue Canada if they don't like our regulations. It attacks our dairy and our agriculture sector and supply management. You know who survives a boycott of Canadian beef? Giant beef corporations. You know who doesn't survive? Small to medium family farms who are relying on that export or relying on that market. We need regional food markets, not big trade deals that damage our sovereignty and risk our Canadian businesses and risk our Canadian jobs.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
Mr. Krasowski, I started talking about the Canadian Wheat Board. Sorry, I got a little carried away there, but I do want to talk about where this port with federal help, could become a world transportation leader, and that's in specialty grains and legumes. They already do a fair number of, they already do fair tonnage in that. They could become a world leader in shipping that from the head of the Great Lakes, and I think that that's certainly one of the areas that the port can certainly move forward on, and I'm certainly prepared to help.
Thank you. Ms. Camuzzi?
Let me just make a quote here from two companies. Canadian Grain Growers of Canada. We're excited that the Trans-Pacific Partnership has been completed, said Gary Stanford, president of the Canadian Grain Growers. The agreement promises to provide substantial gains for Canada's grain sector and agricultural industry as a whole. The Alberta Wheat Commission also said we could not afford to remain on the sidelines and risk losing ground in key markets. The TPP will also provide significant benefits for other export-oriented agriculture sectors, including barley, canola, beef, pork, and give Canadian producers an advantage over competitors outside of this agreement. That's how we're going to make our port busier. By embracing the TPP, by allowing you have 800 million new consumers that we can choose from. That'll help our economy and help grow our port. Thank you.
Ms. Radburn.
Let's ask the Auto Workers Union. Let's ask the dairy farmers that took their cows down to Ottawa and paraded them in front of Parliament Hill what they think about the TPP. Let's ask the lumber, people displaced out of lumber and paper and pulp and paper in this community from NAFTA alone. Big trade agreements that are not vetted first appropriately through our legislation do not benefit us. They benefit large corporations. By running our agriculture sector to specifically just wheat or beef or simple grains, we lose the ability to produce our own food. Right now, Vancouver, 3 to 5% of its food is produced locally or regionally. 50 years ago, 95% of it was. When those companies or those corporations in those foreign countries decide that we need to pay more or they're not shipping it anymore and we're not going to grow it here anymore because we're so focused on growing one crop that we're shipping to a foreign country, how are we supposed to feed ourselves affordably and sustainably?
Thank you. Last speaker call is Mr. Rafferty.
Pardon me, we have a policy of from farm to fork, and that's protecting small and medium-sized family farms. And TPP, Christy, you're absolutely right. Certainly dairy farmers, we're going to see a number of small farms disappear under that agreement. And I'll just leave you with this statistic. In the last 9 years under Stephen Harper, 30,000 family farms have been abandoned in Canada in 9 years.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. I'm going to turn to mic number 2 for your question, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the candidates their thoughts on the expansion of the Canada Pension Plan.
Okay. Ms. Radburn, go ahead.
The Green Party is advocating a gradual expansion of the Canada Pension Plan from 25% of earned earnings to 50% of earned earnings, in addition to our guaranteed living income. And that's in order to alleviate seniors' poverty or seniors' pensions not stretching over the lifetime.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm proud to be the retirement security critic for the NDP, and hope to continue not as the critic, but in some other role. It's still involved with retirement security after this election. We propose, first of all, and immediately to put the retirement age back to 65 from 67. Now, you're probably wondering what that means in terms of dollars. For the average senior, that'll be about $13,000 in their pocket. Why is that important? Because most of those seniors are single women. Single women are the poorest segment of our seniors groups in Canada, and there's no reason why any senior should live in poverty. We have promised to expand CPP over the next 10 years, and to put in annually $400 million into GIS to help those 20% of seniors in Canada who live below the poverty line. 20% in Thunder Bay, Rainy River live below the poverty line. That's inexcusable.
Well, and like the NDP, the Liberals plan to roll back the age of eligibility for the CPP from 67, which the Conservatives have done, to 65. Now, I'm going to go off a little bit here, but I spoke with some union leaders not so long ago and understand how important pensions are, especially to retired people. I've known people who've lost their pensions after working their entire lives, and one particular individual that I was speaking with threw a bug into my ear, and it was In U.S. negotiations, their biggest fight is pension benefits and health care. They don't have that fight with the companies here in terms of health care. But he got me thinking about thinking of pensions like health care in Canada and making sure everyone had a secure retirement and it was guaranteed by the government. I want to advocate for that. I know the Liberal plan is right now to strengthen CPP, but I
Thank you,
want to
Mr.
go further.
Resnick. Ms. Kamuzi?
As of late, we have pension splitting for our seniors. We have a new single seniors tax credit up to $2,000 that you can benefit from. We have our old age, our 65 or older net income of less than $80,000 you can claim up to a certain percentage. If you make under $35,000, you can claim up to $7,000 a year. We have pension splitting, income splitting for seniors, the individual tax credit for widow and widower seniors. All these programs have helped seniors. We also have the increased GIS as well. So I think that those are great programs that help our seniors. Thank you.
Ms. Radburn?
And yet those senior poverty rates increased by 20% under Harper.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty?
I just want to continue in the vein that I was talking about. One of the things that I want to give everybody fair warning about now is Kathleen Wynne's Ontario pension plan is destined for failure. And I can tell you why, and I don't have enough time right now, but I'd certainly be happy to do that. But why is she doing it in the first place? She's doing it because she can't get the Prime Minister to sit down with her. Tom Mulcair will sit down with all the premiers twice a year, and one of the first orders of business is to talk to Kathleen Wynne and say, listen, we can make sure that CPP works for everybody. Help us make it work. You don't need to double or triple the bureaucracy. You don't need to institute your own plan that is not going to be there, quite frankly, for Ontarians who are 20 and 30 years old now. Let's make it work. Let's sit down with all the premiers, make retirement security work for everybody in Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Okay, the last question at mic number 2.
Hello, I'm
You're
Dennis Ukrainic, President of Northwest Ontario Sportsmen's Alliance. My question is for Mr. Rafferty. You speak of Prime Minister Harper's lack of democratic process. However, I do recall your own party leadership punishing you and Bruce Heyer for democratically voting in favor of scrapping the long gun registry. So why should we believe that Mulcair will not revisit the issue of imposing costly firearm control measures upon law-abiding hunters, trappers, and farmers, just as Liberals have recently proposed with their stated firearm platform, which once more will do nothing more than impose restrictions on law-abiding firearm owners?
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty?
Well, I don't know if you were here at the very beginning when I quoted from the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, the October edition here, where it says, the NDP has been absolutely clear. We have no plan to bring back the failed Liberal long gun registry. We all know this was an initiative that divided Canadians, and we will not be turning back the clock. It was interesting, Althea Raj, who is a journalist for, I think, Huffington Post, she wrote something about Bruce Heyer, and I just sent her a quick little note, and I said, you know, Althea, it's funny that in all these years, these couple of years since this whole kerfuffle happened with the long gun registry and my vote and Bruce Heyer's vote, it's funny that no journalist, not one, has wanted to talk to the other half of that team. They only listen to Bruce Heyer, and as he continues to try to make his legend grow, there's a reason why I stayed. And I know I'm running out of time, but I'll be happy to talk with you about it after. But you can be guaranteed that that's very low on the priority list. You've already heard all the things that we've talked about today and how important they all are. The long gun registry is not even there. Listen, you can get sucked into Stephen Harper's quest for asking for money for the next 20 years about the long gun registry returning. It's not returning. It's always been a money grab by Stephen Harper, and he's still using it.
Thank you.
Don't be fooled.
Mr. Rusnick?
Well, the Liberals will not bring back a long gun registry. We have some of the toughest gun laws in the world here in Canada, and that's false advertising by the Conservative Party of Canada, and some people buy into it, but look at the platform online, and I can tell you that as a hunter myself, and likely going to buy a 22 for some bird hunting, because the shotgun hunting isn't sport anymore, I don't believe in a long gun registry.
Thank you. Ms. Camuzzi.
There's facts here. First of all, we'll start with Mr. Rafferty. Voting no to Bill C-42, which is our common sense firearms legislation, is voting against law-abiding hunters and farmers. When Thomas Mulcair says a new improved gun registry, we're going to bring it back without going overboard. And giving the police the tools to do their job, that's a registry. If it looks like a registry, it smells like a registry, it's a registry, Mr. Rafferty. And I would like to know how you're going to vote when you're asked, because your leader will reinstate a long gun registry without going overboard. In the meantime, Mr. Trudeau has gone on record as saying, it says, both Justin and Thomas Mulcair have signaled their intent to impose new restrictions on lawful firearm owners. Well, our government will not reinstate a long gun registry. It's penalizing law-abiding hunters and farmers and our way of life, and it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Ms. Camuzzi. Ms. Radburn.
Yeah, as a hunting widow coming up very shortly, I wanted to clarify the position of the Green Party. Myself, I will not be voting for a return to the long gun registry. Also, the Green Party is the only party up here that will allow me to vote with my constituencies without whipping my vote. And that's really critical.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty?
Well, I'm going to need more than a minute and a half, but I'll start with Ms. Radburn. And this is how it works. You've heard all this stuff about, especially from Bruce Heyer next door, talking about being whipped on votes and everything else. Here's what we do in the NDP, just so we're clear with everybody. If it is a question of confidence in the government, which means usually a money bill, a budget, we will be whipped in that particular case. Every other instance, including private members' bills, we vote our conscience and we vote the way our constituents want us to vote. It's pure and simple, and I always have. And then, people say, oh, well, listen, you all voted as a bloc on this kind of thing. Well, listen, you belong to a party because you believe in that party. You believe in the philosophy of that party. Of course, you're going to be in agreement with your compatriots most of the time. So, don't be fooled by all that rhetoric. It's not true. I have proven in 7 years that I stand up for my constituents each and every vote, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Okay, that ends the time for questions and answers. So I'm going to go back to the candidates for their summations, and we'll start with Ms. Camuzzi.
Thank you, everyone. On October 19th, you'll have a serious question to ask yourself. Do we stay with the proven leadership of Stephen Harper, keeping our taxes low, creating jobs, and keeping Canadian families safe, and not reinstating a wasteful long gun registry that penalizes law-abiding hunters and farmers? Do you enjoy income splitting, pension splitting, universal child tax credit, small business tax credit, and the recent TPP that will create 1 million new jobs and open us to 800 million new consumers? Do you also agree that we deserve more in Thunder Bay Rainy River? The Canada Building Plan has $80 billion available to us for municipalities such as ours, for crumbling infrastructure, the Ring of Fire, and so many more opportunities. On October 19th, I'm asking you to trust me with your vote and our children's futures. My name is Mo Camuzzi. I am your Conservative candidate for the great riding of Thunder Bay Rainy River, and I would be proud to serve as your MP on October 19th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Camuzzi. Mr. Rusnick.
Well, I want to use my last minute to dream a little. The Liberal Party infrastructure plan isn't just about roads and sewers. A Liberal government will provide unprecedented investments in green technologies, social infrastructure, innovation, and education. We need to think big and reinvent ourselves here in northwestern Ontario, and we need to do it in a way that respects our environment, an environment that we all share. We need to support our innovators and the businesses and business community that currently operate across this region. We need to support our skilled tradespeople, our educational institutions, Confederation College and Lakehead University, the Thunder Bay Research Institute, and other innovators across the region to drive what's next, to see ahead of the curve. 20 years ago, no one could imagine this little device could be so important in the lives of so many people in the world today. I want to help innovators in our region do just that, to see in the future. Who knows, where there could be a kid in Emo, Rainy River, Barwick, Fort Francis, Atikokan Mine Center, Kakabeka, Murillo, Oliver Papoonge, Nebing, McKellar, the East End, Northwood, or even my hood, West Fort, that has an idea that will change the world.
Thank you, Mr. Resnick. Ms. Radburn.
Thank you again to our hosts and you, the audience. This election will produce either an NDP or Liberal minority government. The Conservatives have not won here in 80 years, and they're not going to start on October 19th. The only lost vote in this election is a thrown-away vote on an individual who will be a political backbencher, a cog in a vast political machine, or relegated to the sidelines of decision-making in a token position. On a party who doesn't represent your beliefs or the change you truly want to see. The Greens will pick up 6 to 10 seats, giving them the balance of power in a minority government, the ability to negotiate for Green policies, and ensure the minority keeps its promises. The Greens have forced Harper to recognize the Truth and Reconciliation Report, opposed Bill C-51 first, passed the first and only climate change legislation in the House. They consistently challenged Stephen Harper at every turn, all from a two-person party where Thunder Bay NPP is the MP is the deputy leader, a voice of power in the party and the government. You want an MP with power and voice in their party, an MP that will join a small group of committed citizens to change Canada's future, then you want to vote Green.
Thank you. Mr. Rafferty.
It's been my distinct honor to represent all of my constituents in Thunder Bay, Rainy River for the last 7 years. And I've been proud of the work that I've done in Ottawa, and prouder still of the work that I've done in the constituency. I'd like to give a shout out to my staff in my offices, my 3 offices in this riding and 1 in Ottawa. They, quite frankly, make me look good every day by the work from the work that they do, and they do fabulous work. I've been proud to be the critic for FedNor and forestry. I've also been proud to work with veterans and Veterans Affairs, and to be the critic, the opposition critic for retirement security. I hope to continue in those roles, and there's much work to do. For example, I see some first responders here in the audience. Let's make sure that PTSD is recognized for first responders in this country, and make sure that in legislation they are protected and their jobs are protected. There is much more to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rafferty. Well, I'd like to thank the 4 candidates for a very lively, thank you, discussion and debate, and hopefully for you, the audience, informative. Also like to thank the panel of media for their questions and stirring questions as well. And again, the Chronicle Journal for making the facility in the evening possible. And most importantly, I'd like to thank each of you for coming out. It's important, this election, unlike any we've had in the past, to my memory, and I've been around for a while. So it's important that we pick up information, make our decisions, maybe even make decisions to vote in a way that perhaps we hadn't done before. So the onus is on you to get out. You're informing yourselves tonight, so for that I congratulate you and ask you to get out and exercise your franchise on October the 19th. So thank you very much for coming out, and have a good evening.